One thing, we kind of alluded to this earlier, actually, but it's really worth hitting this like over the head with a giant hammer. People think that offensive support is more important than defensive support in this game. For example, everyone's like, oh yeah, bro, yeah, I love my might, I love my quickness, oh yeah, it's so good. But no one's ever like, wow, guys, protection, insanely overpowered boon. Perma regen, actually disgusting. If you took a pug raid, or even a pug fractal group actually, and you increase the protection uptime to 100%, you increase the regen uptime to 100%, you increase the swiftness uptime. By the way, that one is one that really drops a lot these days, actually. Swiftness in raids to 100%, you dramatically increase the win rate. And this is something that a lot of players really don't get. Everyone's like, oh yeah, bro, I want, yeah, I want my 3% extra DPS. Oh yeah, dude, let's go. Right? The problem with this is that they then feed instantly, go down state and die, right? And their 3% extra DPS was completely pointless. And like, it turns out that losing defensive support is absolutely horrible in any kind of content.
So yeah, normally I don't stream this late, and I had done the podcast with Silver, but I had some things that I wanted to go over with Teapot that I was really excited about. So yes, we have a surprise stream, sort of podcast, sort of just discussion, and I'll try to integrate chat into it as well for as much as we can too. But I'd done a podcast, and I don't know if everybody is subscribed to my YouTube, but we actually had a podcast just talking about End of Dragons when the first round of Elite Specs came out. And obviously, even with my being a bit newer than everybody else, we kind of just shot the breeze, and we were all on the same wavelength discussing certain things about the game. And I didn't think about the fact that some people might not understand what we're talking about. And so I actually had a couple of comments from new players that were looking at checking out the game saying, wow, this was actually really informative, except that I didn't know half of the things you were saying because you use terms that I've never heard. And so I've been collecting some terms that I thought would be fun because Teapot, you recently did a video about all of the things in Guild Wars 2, like what makes it great. And you have this, well, once you have your voice back after yelling at people from earlier, but you have kind of like this David Attenborough voice that you use when you do your YouTube videos that I don't have because I have a voice like Timey no matter what I do. So I figured for some of them, I would just ask you if you could elaborate on certain things, certain terms that I would ask, where you would see them, and how people could possibly, especially new players, benefit from hearing them, hearing that information now, because maybe they missed it and they never went back to it.
Yeah, sure thing.
So I think one of the biggest things initially, and this is probably going to sound kind of silly for you, all of you vets, which is why I'm going to ask you guys in chat also to come up with some as well, because I think it'd be fun. But one that I know what it stands for, but I don't actually know what the abbreviation is legitimately for, like the words that are supposed to be the abbreviation. So LI, I know that it's, like kill proof, but I don't exactly know what LI is or what it means.
It's Legendary Insight. So it's a raid term, and it essentially turned into this kill proof thing because it is a universal kill proof. So every time you kill a boss on the weekly reset from wings 1 through 4, so the first 4 raid wings, the Heart of Thorns raids basically, you get a Legendary Insight. There are actually a few other things that aren't bosses that give you this. For example, there are a few little mini events within the raids that give you a Legendary Insight as well, but it's mostly from killing bosses, and it's used for 2 purposes. You use it to show, oh, look, I've killed a bunch of bosses. Look how good I am at this video game. And you also use it to craft legendary armor as one of the key components for that. You need 10 weeks of raids, basically, from Wings 1 through 4 to craft a full set of legendary armor. Your first set. After that, it gets a bit more expensive. It doubles in price. And you can actually convert the other ones, because you might have heard this term too, LD, right, which is Legendary Divination, which is the same thing, but for Path of Fire raids. And you can convert them back and forth.
Know that, and I didn't know there was a difference. And when I was doing a couple of the podcasts with Mello, because we've been talking strictly about raids, he's just like, yeah, so you have your kill proof and your LI, and I'm like, yeah, trying to be a good host, but I'm like, that was one of the things that I actually didn't know. So that was a big one. Another one I think that a lot of new people have asked about is utility skills and how they differ from the main abilities. I know this, but maybe it'll be better explained from someone else, and how you can choose your utilities based on your traits and your build.
This is actually an interesting one, because everyone calls them utility skills, but this is actually not what the game calls them, funnily enough. And I actually do this too. It's kind of a bad habit. They're actually called slot skills, right? And they're the skills to the right of your health orb, in the middle, and they're the ones that aren't tied to your weapon. And the reason they're different to your weapon skills is for exactly that reason. In Guild Wars 2, you have a lot of skills that you'll always have. In other words, your profession mechanics, like attuning to different elements on Elementalist or shattering on Mesmer. You'll have weapon skills that change based on what weapon you have equipped. But the skills to the right of the health orb are slot skills, and they're called that because, well, you can slot in different abilities, any abilities that you like. And the utility skill thing comes from the middle three. So there are 5 slot skills. You have a heal skill, 3 utility skills, and 1 elite skill, right? Just like that. That's what those are. So in other words, utility skills are a subset of slot skills, which are the skills that aren't the ones you get from your weapons or from your profession mechanic. Boom.
I've always just called them utilities as well. I didn't know that they had another name. This is actually really informative for me. And I saw actually Mana in chat was already like LI. Oh, okay. See, you guys? So this was one that I actually really liked, because I feel like there are still veterans who don't know how to take care of it. But one of my big ones was Breakbar. And I feel like a lot of people don't know the difference between a bar, what we call a break bar, and an actual defiance bar. And so if we could talk about break bar versus defiance bar, and when people misuse the term, and how all of them became known as break bars, and what you do with them.
So this is actually, again, this actually shows you how the game doesn't do a particularly good job of telegraphing this, because break bar is actually not a real term. Break bar is what players call it, because you break the bar, right, by using crowd control. It's actually called the defiance bar. That's what the game calls it, the defiance bar. And essentially what it is that some enemies are too powerful, right? So they can't be crowd controlled by normal means. And what you'll see is that under their health bar, you'll see like a gray bar, right? That means that there's nothing that you can do. You cannot crowd control it in any way. However, if you see kind of a blue teal defiance bar, this means that something will happen if you drain that bar using crowd control abilities, such as stuns, knockbacks, even stuff like conditions, right? Immobilize, slow, these things all break it, right? And eventually break the bar. But yeah, the defiance bar and break bar, those refer to the same thing. The correct term is defiance bar. The colloquial term, what players call it, is break bar, because you break the bar.
And speaking of CC was a good one, because I have had actually, and one of the things that people were talking in chat was that a lot of people don't necessarily know what CC actually means, that you need to use it on enemies with a defiance bar. And also some people thought that CC was actually Condi cleanse and not, yeah. So if we want to discuss that too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of an interesting one, because of course CC Condi cleanse would make sense in Guild Wars 2. Like when people say CC, that's like a broad gaming term, not even necessarily a Guild Wars 2 term, right? It's one of those things that, yeah, CC is crowd control, right? And I think even that term, I'm not really a big fan of even the term crowd control, really. I think it's a really bad term because it doesn't really tell you what it actually means. Like crowd control, it's not really what it is. I mean, it kind of is. But what you actually mean when people say CC is anything that allows you to disrupt your opponent's control, like, their autonomy, right? You can push them, you can pull them, you can knock them down, right? Or something like that, or immobilize them, slow them, cripple them, chill them, right? That's what crowd control is. But I think it is definitely a bit of a term that can be confusing initially, regardless of your background, in gaming, or even knowing what the term means. There are a lot of things within crowd control that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be there. For example, this is one thing that people really, really underestimate all the time, is how important conditions are to breaking breakbars. So in general, 1 second of stun does 100 breakbar damage, right? Which again is a bit of a weird thing because you can't see that number on the enemy anywhere. That's ANET's fault, though, okay? Not the player's fault. But it turns out that immobilize actually does 50 breakbar a second. So in other words, 2 seconds of immobilize will be the same as a 1 second stun, right? And if you pile on slow and blind and cripple and chill, if you have all these conditions, it actually drains it really, really quickly, actually. So that's kind of one of the things that people overlook because of what people perceive crowd control to be.
And speaking of which, we could possibly elaborate on that even more and talk about the difference between the hard CC and slow CC and what abilities those are.
So hard crowd control typically refers to something that prevents your opponent from taking actions completely, like absolutely, right? So if you get stunned, you can't do anything except stun break, right? That's the only thing you can do. That's not strictly true because you can actually still use instant cast abilities. Bit of an interesting gimmick there with Guild Wars 2 in particular. So, if I get stunned and I've got a shout, say on my Tempest, on my Guardian, I can still do that while I'm stunned. Same thing with Scourge, right? If I want to use my Shade abilities, I can still do that while I'm stunned. But in general, you can't do anything while you're stunned, knocked down, knocked, pulled, right? Whatever. You can't do anything. And soft crowd control is usually something that does something annoying to you, but it doesn't actually take control away from the user, right? Take control away from the actor. In this case, for example, if you get crippled, right, you can still do all your moves, right? You can use all your skills, you can turn around, you can still move, but you're just slower, right? And even if you get immobilized, you can still use abilities, right? You haven't lost control, you've still got autonomy over your character. So that's the distinction between soft CC and hard CC.
While we're still talking about abilities and the UI, I know that ArenaNet is actually doing a better job at this where certain things highlight. I think it's just your voice. But
wait, is it though? I'm not sure. Wait,
I don't know. I'm not hearing anything weird, so I wanted to make sure.
I'm scared. Wait, how about now? Does that sound better?
I mean, you sound the same to me. Time to pull out Urban Dictionary. See, this is what I'm saying, because some people still don't even know what these terms are. Just the rasp. Okay. Yeah, I know. His voice isn't as David Attenborough as we would like it.
It'll recover. Trust me, 10, 15 minutes, we're good. We're good to go.
But I know ArenaNet has been going over this a bit better so that when you're in a field, your finisher abilities now highlight so that you can create combos. And I did see with End of Dragons that when you are in certain areas, there's going to be little tutorials that teach this. So maybe we could talk about what a field is, what a finisher is, and what a combo is.
So combos are kind of an interesting system in Guild Wars 2 that allow certain abilities to gain bonus effects when interacting with abilities that are created by other players. For example, if you have an elementalist put down a wall of fire, and then you have a ranger fire their longbow through that field, it will light the arrows on fire, right? And then the target will get burning from the ranger right there as well. So you have this ability to interact with other abilities to create bonus effects, right? Typically themed around the type of field, right? Water fields are oriented around healing, for example. You might have an ice field that will, give you a frost aura or something like that. You can have a dark field that will generate lifesteal. A smoke field will often, if you leap through it, will give you stealth. Blast, it will give you area effect stealth, all that sort of thing. And there are different types of finishers that have different effects and different fields that combo differently with different effects there as well. It's not... It's typically more of a thing that sees a lot more usage in PvP, is where you'll see it the most these days. It used to be much more relevant in other areas of the game, but the game kind of evolved away from combos. It was, in PvE in World versus World, and is now a little bit more oriented towards using normal abilities. But combos, they can still give you a little bit of an edge, right? They can definitely give you that extra little bit you need to win.
Mm-hmm. Like another thing that a lot of people might not know because they don't actually read them, especially for putting things together. Well, first let's go over a build in the most condensed sense of the word, like at its core. What does a build mean in Guild Wars 2?
Gear, skills, traits. That is a
Perfect. Build. Because I feel like a lot of people, when they look at the stats for Guild Wars 2, the stats for Guild Wars 2, while the actual text, when you hover over them, are pretty much the same that you normally see in an MMO, but the actual names of these stats are different. So for an example, or even boons. So we could go over what is a boon versus a condition. And then I'll go into the next part that I was going to, because that's a good one as well.
It's funny. I think this is actually a dynamic that really trips people up, is boons and conditions, because in other MMOs, buffs are typically long-term, right? You might, if you're playing WoW, right, you might give yourself a buff that lasts for an hour, right, that increases your intellect or something like that. And it will be a nice buff, but it won't be crazy. But in Guild Wars 2, it's not like that. Not only will the buffs be a lot shorter and a bit more generic, right? Like Might gives you power and con. There's not like a unique thing for Ellie, right? Like everyone can do Might, everyone can give protection. But buffs are also ridiculously powerful in this game, much more powerful than in most other games. For example, the really popular thing is, and I get this a lot, by the way, actually, people play a build and they go and try and do a DPS rotation. And they say, man, I went to try out my DPS rotation and I got like less than half of the number. Teapot, what's going wrong? And then I say, did you put boons on? Did you put boons and conditions on while you were practicing the rotation? And they're like, no, I didn't know you're supposed to do that. And it turns out that, having full buffs in this game will over double your effectiveness, right? Over double, which I think is something that really trips people up. So in general, to kind of after that brief tangent there, boons are positive effects on your character. They can be offensive, defensive utility, right? Block an attack, run really fast, take less damage, do more damage, crit more, be immune to slows, right, etc. And conditions are just the opposite, right? They'll make you do less damage, right? They'll make you move slower. They'll make your abilities take longer to use or longer to recharge, right? And that's what a condition is. It's just the, boons and conditions, positive effects, negative effects, but very strong, like unbelievably strong. For example, this is one of the ones that I think people really sleep on. I guarantee you most players don't even know what this effect does. Weakness, right? Weakness is probably the most overpowered condition in the game. It is disgusting. What it actually does is, one, halves your endurance regeneration rate, so you can dodge like 50% less. Have fun with that. Two, it makes half of your attacks fumbles, which means that they can't crit and do half damage. It turns out that having weakness on you reduces your damage by 40%, right? With one debuff. That's how good boons and conditions are. And the converse is true with boons, right? If you have might, that's like a 30% damage increase. If you have quickness, again, 33% damage increase. If you have protection, 33% damage reduction. Insane. This is definitely a really good point to cover, because I think most players not only don't know what they do, but don't realize just how unbelievably good boons really are.
Absolutely. That and just their actual stats to begin with. So one of the big ones that I've seen is a lot of people don't know ferocity, concentration, is another one, and precision. So if we could delve into those three a little bit more. I feel like everything else is a little bit more self-explanatory, but those three and how they affect, like your crit, for example, and critical strike.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Bonus meme. Conditions are also damage over time, by the way. Bonus meme. Forgot that.
Yep.
Damage over time, guys. Conditions. But this is actually a really interesting one, because you know what's really, really weird is that the game originally actually had these things in their refined form. So you would have, instead of ferocity, you had crit damage, right? And it would say like plus 1% crit damage, which was much more readable. But the problem was that it was much harder to balance, right? Because of the way that the numbers were working out. So the numbers didn't look quite right. So they weren't able to do that. They had to change it to a converter. They did this with boon duration too and condition duration. Everything used to be like plus X% duration, but then they changed it to converter stats, right? Concentration for boon duration and expertise for condition duration. And this is actually one of the things that I think the game should probably try and rectify. This is a really, really good point here, because, well, and also the numbers are weird too. So 21 precision gives you 1% critical strike chance. 15 ferocity, concentration, and expertise gives you 1%. Ferocity gives you crit damage. Concentration gives you 15, gives you 1% boon duration. 15 expertise gives you 1% condition duration. And yeah, you have all these extra stats. And yeah, you can mouse over them, but it's not necessarily apparent how good one of these stats actually is, and even like necessarily what it's even doing. But yeah, that's what it is. Precision, 21 gives you 1% crit chance, and 15 of all the other ones converts into what it converts into, basically. Both are displayed in the hero panel kind of next to each other, and if you mouse over them, it will say what it does, but it doesn't say how much of it you need for 1%, which is definitely a bit of a telegraphing issue with the game. And in general, the stats are a bit weird. For example, if you mouse over power, I always find this funny, actually. It just says increases attack. Like, what? What does that even mean, right? What do you mean increases attack?
So does
right?
crit.
Yeah, like what a bizarre thing, like what an unusual thing to say, right? But yeah, no, this is actually one of the areas of the game, the stats, the attributes that are quite badly explained to the player.
And going over that in general, I feel like a lot of people, when you're talking about builds and, or more specifically, essentially what role you're playing, and I use the term role a little bit more loosely here, because of not necessarily having to play the Trinity. So I feel like a lot of people don't know the difference between what a power build, a condi build, and a support build is, especially for the different game modes and specifically for support.
Power damage is very simple. It's just direct damage. You hit something and a number pops up. Good job. You did power damage. And a condi build is something that focuses on applying conditions, which are damage over time effects. Now, funnily enough, because of the way the Guild Wars 2 combat system works, there's not really, almost all abilities have a power component to them. So if you have, and this actually really makes it really confusing, by the way, for new players in particular, because it's not immediately apparent what type of weapon does what type of damage. For example, if I'm on playing Necromancer and I've got a scepter, if I'm attacking with it, I'm like swiping it at people, I'll be doing power damage. However, not that much. It's actually a condition weapon. Scepter is a very heavy condition-focused weapon. And you can piece that together if you read through the traits and you kind of look at, all the abilities that are to do with Scepter seem to have something to do with condition damage. Bit of a hint there, right? And a lot of the Scepter weapons do have conditions on them, so you can maybe figure it out that way. But it's not very immediately apparent, particularly because this isn't consistent. Let's take a look at, say, a weapon like Staff on Elementalist. This actually has a lot of burning on it, right? Like the 4th skill has burning, the 3rd skill has burning, right? But this is actually, well, funnily enough, this actually is a kind of a hybrid weapon that can do power damage and condition damage. But what I'm trying to get at here is that a lot of the times, if you just read the tooltips as a new player without necessarily kind of like playing around with it a little bit and seeing how it works out, it won't be immediately apparent to you what is actually good for power damage and what is actually good for condi, because all of the scaling, right? Like, how much power damage does this weapon do isn't really obvious, and how much Condi damage does it do also isn't very obvious there whatsoever. You might not necessarily be able to determine that without actually trying out for yourself and seeing how the numbers go up and down depending on what gear you have. This is definitely one of the things that really trips people up in Guild Wars 2 a lot because of the way the weapon system works, right? And the way abilities can sometimes, they might look like they're Condi, but actually it's power, and vice versa. It gets more confusing when you go cross game mode as well, because in World versus World, for example, if you want to play Necromancer, you do play Scepter because it's got loads of boon corruption, but you play it as a power weapon because it turns out that it actually has some good power scaling on it as well, and you can actually get value out of that with the rest of your build being focused around power. So the water gets really, really muddy when you actually look at different objectives for a certain build in different game modes with different contexts. And yeah, like that's basically the fundamental difference there. Like power, direct damage, Condis, damage over time, right? But Condi builds rather, will actually have power damage associated with them. And in some cases, it can actually be very, very relevant. Pretty good example of this would actually be Engineer. Engineer is very famous for this. Engineer typically has power and condition damage builds, but the Condi builds or condition damage builds that Engineer runs typically actually have a lot of power damage in them as well. They're very hybrid oriented with the way they work. So you'll actually have a bit of a mixture of the damage types there too. This is actually similarly true for Reaper. Reaper, you can play it as a power build or a Condi build, and the Condi build actually has a lot of power damage built into it because of the way the system works, right? A lot of condition damage builds have this slightly hybrid element to them. So dealing kind of a little bit of both, but obviously primarily conditions. And support builds in just from a general term, they're things that make your allies be more effective, right? Mm-hmm. And this is actually a really, really big thing. Oh man, I love this one. This one's so good. This one is so good because a lot of people actually think that the really overpowered builds in Guild Wars 2 are the DPS builds. They're completely wrong. Of course, the meta in Guild Wars 2 is and always has been, since Heart of Thorns, been entirely defined by supports. Supports are by far the strongest builds in Guild Wars 2, not even remotely close. For example, if you actually think about a druid gives 25 might to 10 people. In other words, it increases the damage output of 10 people, or rather, 9, not including itself, of course, by 30% or so, kind of in that region. And think what that actually means. If you've got a build that does 20,000 DPS, right, that means that a druid increases that by 6,000, right, on every player. So that means that druid is adding 54,000 damage per second to the group, right? And that's not even including all the other nice things it can bring, like healing, right? Defensive support, more offensive support with, say, little buffs that make you do more damage. Because there's also, well, that's another thing too. There are not just boons and conditions. There are also unique modifiers that do other things as well. Another layer of complexity. But supports are incredibly strong. It's one of the really big misconceptions that, there's no Holy Trinity in Guild Wars. So, there's, you don't have like support builds. No, support builds are by far the most potent and meta game defining builds that actually exist. And that's basically been true since Heart of Thorns came out.
Absolutely. And I think my biggest thing just explaining support to people, especially coming from other MMOs, is, well, at least World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, is that you have, tank DPS and heals. You don't necessarily have support. And support, especially in different game modes based on what you're trying to do, can mean a ton of different things. Like, keeping whoever you're, against in PvP at bay, with all of these conditions, and just making sure that they don't get to, a point for conquest, or, boon support, or heals, or quickness. So, and with that, I would say probably another one of the big things is a lot of the actual boons and the conditions people have trouble with too that they've asked me. And I think the top ones, the top 2 for boons are alacrity and stability, and what those do.
So these are kind of in a category called utility boons, is what I'd call them, right? They kind of they do something that is like very specific. Right? It's a very specific thing they do, less general, right? Like it applies to only a certain area of the game. Stability is a stacking boon. In other words, you can have like 1 stack of stability, 2 stacks, 3 stacks, 25 stacks. And when you get hit by a crowd control effect, a hard crowd control effect, like a knockback, a stun, a daze, a pull, a push, that sort of thing, you won't get controlled, right? You'll still retain control of your character, but you'll lose 1 stack of stability. That's what stability is. Amazing boon. Incredibly good. Absolutely vital in World versus World, because it turns out that getting nuked by 1 million people at the same time, kind of good not to get crowd controlled. And in PvP as well, very important, right? Because, again, how are you going to kill the other guy, right, if you're getting locked down? Not possible. It's actually more of a niche boon in PvE, but it's particularly strong in open world, where loads of the big guys, right, like a massive dragon punches you, right, you're going to fall over. You won't with stability, right? And it can actually trivialize certain raid encounters, and you can use it to skip mechanics or survive mechanics, where a big raid boss is going to smash you, for example. Alacrity is... Alacrity, I know I said it was very niche, and it is, because it has a slightly weird effect, right? It makes your skills recharge faster, but what that actually translates into is you are better in every way. Your healer can heal more. Your DPS can DPS more. You can apply more stability, for example, because your cooldowns are lower, right? You can swap attunements faster on Elementalist. You can get your ability, that really cool ability you use to revive people. Yeah, you can get that back faster now, right? Everything gets better on Alacrity. And the wording on Alacrity is a little bit weird. So the way Alacrity is worded is it says 25% increased recharge rate. I actually really wish they changed the wording on this, because I feel like that's not a very intuitive way. What that actually means is 20% cooldown reduction. So if you have an ability that takes 10 seconds to recharge, it will take 8 seconds if you have Alacrity for the entire duration of the recharge instead.
Yeah. And speaking of stability and what it does, I also have a lot of people who had asked on YouTube videos I feel like they're very intuitive, and for me are really like in your face, but maybe for some people they might not be. But a stun break ability and a Condi cleanse ability.
So a stun break, again, it's one of those things that has a broader meaning. It won't just get you out of a stun; it will get you out of any hard crowd control, right? So if you're knocked down, if you just got like punted by a knockback or something like that, or if you're stunned, or if you're dazed, it will cancel that effect immediately, and then you'll be able to play the game instantaneously again. That's a stun break. And Condi cleanse is exactly that. It removes conditions, right? So if you have bleeding on you, right, and you know that bleed is going to kill you. Say that you're on 5,000 HP, you've got 25 stacks of bleed. Oh boy, I'm not gonna last much longer. That's not looking good. If you go ahead and use a condition cleanse ability, it will remove that condition and prevent any further effects from happening. So in other words, if you got hit by like, oh no, I'm on fire right now, and I'm taking like a 10,000 damage a second. Oh, what a disaster! You can cancel the remaining effect of that burning or bleeding or whatever immediately, right, by removing that condition. And the other thing to notice about this is that, of course, that also applies to the debilitating conditions. So if you get immobilized, you can remove that with a condition cleanse. And here's a really fun one, okay? There's a special case here with fear. So fear is a hard crowd control, right? In other words, you run away, oh, and it's true for taunt too, actually. Fear and taunt are both this way. So taunt, you run towards your target. Fear, you go, oh, running away. And stun break and condition cleanse work on those two. So in other words, if you remove a condition, it will get you out of fear and taunt. And if you stun break, it will remove those conditions. That's that kind of weird edge case that maybe people might not expect.
And since we're getting to the end of talking about boons and conditions and stats and such, I did feel like one of the things that we were talking about in this podcast, when I had multiple people saying that they didn't know what we were saying, one of the big ones was elite specializations versus core. So if we want to delve into that a little bit further and what elite actually means and what core actually means to the game.
So broadly speaking, Core specializations are the ones that come without the expansions, right? But there is a mechanical difference as well. So core specializations don't affect your profession mechanic. Elite specializations do. So let's take a Necromancer is a really good example of this because it's got some really nice design on its elite specialization. So one, you're only allowed one elite spec because modifying your profession mechanic more than once, probably a little bit weird. That wouldn't even really make any sense. Let's take Necromancer here. So Reaper. Reaper changes your normal death shroud that you have with Necromancer, right, which is range. You fire out bolts of life at people, you suck in life, you chain people with like a tainted shackle, right, and fear people at range. It changes you from a ranged attacker into a pure melee attacker instead. So whenever you go in Death Shroud, instead of having those ranged abilities, you have completely different abilities, right? Your Shroud drains a little bit faster, and you get loads of new skills. You get a giant melee scythe that you can swing at people, and you get another 5 skills entirely. Elite specializations also come with additional slot skills, right? So every elite spec has a heal skill, a bunch more slot skills, utility skills, and a new elite skill with that. And you can only use those abilities if you're currently using that elite specialization. So for example, Reaper gets shouts. You can use any of the core abilities and core trait lines with Reaper, but you can't use Reaper abilities with core. And that's also true of the other elite specialization with Scourge, because Scourge says, you know what, Death Shroud, that's for suckers. We're not using that whatsoever. And you get a bunch of new buttons that you can press anytime you want in exchange for Life Force, but you can't use any Reaper abilities, that you can't use the Reaper Shroud, and you can't use the original core Shroud, and you can't use Reaper Shouts. You can use core Necromancer abilities and Scourge abilities, but you can't use Reaper. And that's true with every profession in the game. There are 2 elite specializations currently for each profession, soon to be a 3rd, of course, with End of Dragons. And there's a special slot. There's like a nice slot at the bottom of your trait window where you can select your elite specialization or not. You don't have to use one. That will, again, drastically change your playstyle, build, and give you access to certain abilities and additional traits with that trait line. I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think so too. Chat's just discussing whether or not core is actually viable in certain game modes, so I don't know if you want to tell them about that real quick, if they can be utilized.
They actually do a really good job of this in PvP, not so much anywhere else. But in PvP, they're doing a really great job making core good. For example, if we look at core Necromancer is actually best in slot right now. You see it played in the top teams, the absolute highest level of play. So even if you're a free-to-play player, you can be 100% competitive, very high level PvP. Same with core Guardian. It's actually the best support in the game right now. Core Ranger is an incredibly good duelist, right, that you can play, right? Very good for 1v1s. Core Thief is not the best build for Thief, but it's actually very strong, particularly for ranked. You can play a conditioned Thief build there too. Core Warrior is actually surprisingly good. Not a lot of people play it because Warrior in general is a little underpowered right now, but Core Warrior is surprisingly powerful, again, for duels and some high damage dealing output there as well. Some of the other ones do tend to fall down a little bit. Core Engie, not great. Core Mesmer, not horrible actually, but not, I wouldn't recommend really playing it, to be honest. Core Rev was actually nearly meta for a time. There was a time when Core Revenant was actually being experimented with at very high level for competitive play. But it kind of got superseded by Renegade, the Path of Fire Revenant specialization, actually. Did I miss something? There's more professions. Is that all the professions? Oh, Elementalist. Oh, Core Ellie. Core Ellie is probably the worst specialization in the game.
Oof.
Yes, it's close actually. It's either Firebrand in PvP or Core Ellie. I know Firebrand's better than Core. Yeah, Core Ellie is probably the worst in the entire game for PvP. It is absolute garbage. in every other game mode for World vs. World and endgame PvE, core specs are not great, to be honest. It's mostly dominated by elite specializations. They're playable, right? You could clear the content if you wanted to. If you really like the flavor of the core, you could absolutely do it. But the numbers, Xandrii, they aren't there.
I feel like it depends on the skill of the player for a lot of it too, but this is a whole different conversation that we probably shouldn't get in for that.
Well, I mean, it's true, but there's also numbers. I mean, like,
Well, yeah, but
for example, like core, funny enough, core Ellie in PvE, surprisingly not bad, by the way, in terms of DPS. But if you take something like, let's say, core warrior, Berserker's just better, right? You know, core warrior it does like 2/3 of the damage of Berserker. It's like, oh, nice, feels bad, right? You know, it's just not as good. And, you know, no matter what you do on core Necromancer, you're going to be way worse than Scourge or Reaper, right? Can't do anything, right? You're just worse. Your numbers aren't as good. Your numbers can't win, right? No matter how well you play, your numbers will not be as strong.
I feel like we should have gotten out a tier list for this. This was not the intention in going off onto this tangent, but we should have brought up a tier list. No, we're not bringing up a tier list.
Well, I actually really should clarify that because I don't want any new players to get discouraged by this, by the way. So if you were to do like a viability, people love like viability, right? What could you clear raids with? Let me give you some really great perspective here. So, oh, my phone just fell out of my pocket. Unlucky. So raids are endgame content, right? Wow, very challenging. Oh my goodness, so hard. And a lot of people really struggle with them. But I actually cleared Wing 4 with 4 bosses. And some of them are pretty hard, like particularly the last boss is one. Demos is one that people struggle with a little bit. I cleared that in full exotic gear that was level 68. Level 68 gear, right? So really bad gear. On level 74 characters. Okay, so just everyone's aware there. And that was with core, right? Because you can't get an elite specialization until you're level 80. You have to be level 80. So we cleared the entire raid wing with plenty of time left on the enrage in level 68, 70 gear, right? Core spec only at level 74. And level, by the way, is quite relevant. We were taking about double damage from everything, a little bit more than double damage, because, you know, when you're a lower level than an NPC, right, it wallops you way harder, right? And you do less damage, right? Because when we had less stats, we had less access to traits, because, of course, you know, we had less points to spend, right? Overall, our gear sucked, our weapons sucked, everything was terrible, but we were actually still able to clear a raid, the hardest endgame content, at low level. So to be super clear, the content in Guild Wars 2 is tuned such that you can play absolutely awful builds and still actually succeed with them, assuming you play correctly and you understand how the game works. Right, particularly manipulating boons, funny enough. Like theory crafting boon uptime was the biggest part of that challenge in making it, making it a success. So just a bit of a disclaimer there. Don't go like, oh no, I really like Core Rev. It was really super cool, but I can't because it's not an elite spec. No, that's actually not true. Funny enough, Core Rev is actually really good, particularly for new players, actually, even in a raid or end game PvE environment. So you don't have to worry about that too much. But that's just like a quick disclaimer there on that. The game actually is very flexible, particularly in PvE, with the way you can approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good disclaimer too. And some people were also mentioning in chat that you and your group knew the mechanics, which is also a thing too. Like obviously it's doable trying to figure out the fights doing it for the first time, but it does help knowing the mechanics and knowing, what you're doing and being able to time things better. Yes, game knowledge is amazing.
Well, that's what we're trying to spread. It's a combination of everything. It's a combination of everything. So you've got to view it as knowledge, mechanics, and strategy and composition all adding into this. For example, if you've got 10 new players, is it going to be easier or harder if they play 6 Scourges as DPS or if they play 6 core elementalists? Well, I'll tell you, it's going to be 1,000,000 times easier if they play 6 Scourges, because it turns out that, the builds that are really good, they're really good for a reason, right? Because they do something, right? And they have this capacity to function in these environments and make things easier for you. Think of it as like, those bikes that have like a motor in them that help you go up the hill, right? If you're an old person, or if you're very lazy, right? That's basically what builds strategy and comp are, right? Like, yeah, you don't need the motor to go up the hill, but does it make it way easier? Hell yeah. Of course it does, right? If you run like a proper composition with full boons, full might, loads of damage, right? Loads of utility that counters the fight. For example, if there's a fight with loads of crowd control, loads of knockbacks, take stability and then the fight doesn't do anything, right? Do you need stability to beat the fight? Of course not. You know, you can dodge the attacks, right? You can just kind of eat the attacks, right? And see if you can survive. But is it way easier if you think about your strategy, think about your composition, know the mechanics? Hell yeah, of course it is.
It went a little bit more off than.
Well, it's a really important thing because before the stream, you were talking to me and you were saying stuff like, what are some things that veterans really don't understand? And it's absolutely this. This is actually the thing that I would say. Right, here's like me getting roasted in the comment section. I would say that 95% of people who not only play Guild Wars, so I won't actually just flame the Guild Wars 2 community, any game, literally any, League of Legends, okay, Candy Crush, right, whatever game it is, Guild Wars 2, 95% of people who play any video game do not understand how to win, right, and why you win and why you lose, right? That is just a fact. This is the number one struggle that people have. They do not understand the win condition, right? And how you get to that win condition in any game mode, in PvP, in PvE, in open world, in world versus world. That is the number one thing that people struggle with.
Absolutely. And that, yeah, it is completely relevant. And I feel like there are a lot of things when we get down to brass tacks that even some veterans wish they knew in the beginning, and they might possibly know it now, but they don't necessarily take part in certain game modes or play certain builds because they feel like they either don't understand or they kind of miss the boat initially anyway. So yeah, absolutely. And speaking of which, because we've talked about it a couple of times, world versus world is a big one that is mainly, as far as I know, there might be some MMOs that have something akin to it, but I feel like it's very, very it's big in Guild Wars 2, and it's kind of one of Guild Wars 2's baby is like a mesmer. So if we want to go a little bit further into what world versus world is and how we can actually join world versus world.
World versus world, simply put, is open world PvP with territory control elements. So you have these special maps that are assigned for this. There are 4 of them. You have 3 borderlands and 1 called Eternal Battlegrounds. And you run around, you attack people, you fight other players from different servers, and you take over like giant castles. That's World versus World.
Which is really cool. I actually, just off a little bit, I'm in the Guild Wars 2 Facebook group. And when I was talking about certain things, because I pretty much posted this everywhere for like terms or abbreviations or just certain things that new players or vets or anyone really didn't understand for a long time. And I actually had someone who was talking about all she did was world versus world. And it was like an 80-something-year-old woman. And I just thought that was so cool because I was like, you're talking in the Facebook community. All you do in Guild Wars 2 is world versus world, and I haven't even gone into world versus world yet. That's so cool. A little bit of a tidbit that wasn't really necessary.
I love to hear it. I love to hear it. Awesome.
And since people were talking about it in chat, let's go over a Bannerslave.
Yeah, Banner. This is actually something that I kind of. I like it and I don't like it. So I really like it when people come up with like funny names for builds. For example, a build that I'm very well known for, infamous for, you could even say, is a build that I thought was very funny. I thought this was a funny name. It's called the Thinking Man Scourge, right? And like, what even is that? Like, what the hell is Thinking Man Scourge? What does that even mean? I mean,
you'll tell me.
It means nothing, right? Like it's like, it's a silly meme name that I came up with because of the play style of the build. It's Heal Scourge. It's a support Scourge build is what it is. And I called it the Thinking Man's Scourge because it's a very reactive playstyle, right? You have to understand the fight well to use it. You need to know what your abilities do. You need to be predicting what's going on and reacting to the playstyle. So, you've got to engage the old noggin to make it work. And this is something that is very tempting to do, but it doesn't really help the new player uptake, right? And it's the same thing with Bannerslave. Like, what does that mean? What's Bannerslave? Well, essentially what it is it's essentially a support build for warrior. So warrior, and this is the thing about support in this game. Support does not mean healing necessarily. It can mean buffing too, right? And this is exactly what banners are. Banners are a type of ability that warriors have that you can put down a banner on the ground, and in an area around it, it gives extra stats to players. And it's really good, as it turns out. It massively increases damage by a good percentage point, for all players in your raid, which turns out it's really good, particularly seeing as Warrior itself also does excellent damage. It's called a slave because that's essentially why you typically bring warriors to raids. They can do good damage, but doing good damage isn't very special in Guild Wars 2. Loads of things can do good damage, but warrior is the only thing that has this unique buff called banners, right? That have this unique modifier that further increases damage past even the effects of the normal boons. And there are a few builds like that, right? There are builds that have these interesting names that might not necessarily, tell you exactly what they do. But that's what Bannerslave is. It's a banner support damage hybrid warrior.
That was perfect. And I feel like another one I get is usually like materials or certain things that you might need to craft a legendary or a collection down the road. So Clovers and Laurels, I think, are the biggest ones that I get questions about.
Yeah, this one, this is an interesting one, actually. So Mystic Clovers they're a weird item if you really think about it. They are an item that you can get from various sources in the game. They're very rare. You typically have to actually basically throw gold into the Mystic Forge to obtain them, but they're a very key component in crafting legendaries of all sorts. For example, legendary weapons, legendary armor, legendary runes, sigils, trinkets, whatever. You're going to need these things. And they're very expensive because the typical way of obtaining them, outside of a few time-gated methods in the game, is you can take a mystic coin, a glob of ectoplasm, an obsidian shard, and some spirit shards, basically kind of a currency you get for grinding experience, basically. And throw it into the Mystic Forge, which is basically an area in the game where you can combine items together with recipes, and then it spits something out at you, and it will randomly award you a Mystic Clover at 1 out of 3 times, right? And Mystic Coins, that's a legendary thing that I think a lot of players in this game will be familiar with. They cost 2 gold each, and 1 in 3 odds for a Mystic Clover? Oh boy. It turns out that Mystic Clovers come out at around 8 gold to crafting one of them. So they're an extremely expensive item that you require for crafting legendary items. Laurels are actually a very interesting system. They're basically a daily, they're a loyalty system. They're part of the loyalty system in Guild Wars 2. So every day you log in the game, you'll get a variety of things. You might get like a free item from the trading post. You might get some mystic coins. You might get a bundle of legendary items that you can use to craft legendaries. And you also get laurels. They're basically a time-gated currency. The only way you can get them is by logging into the game. And you can use them on a variety of things. You can unlock some old rewards from season 1. Laurels are weird, and this is why you're absolutely right. This kind of bamboozles people because laurels do loads of weird stuff. You can buy ascended gear with them, some ascended gear. You can buy old rewards from season 1, which isn't even in the game anymore. Whoa, right? And of course, you can also purchase stuff like crafting materials and a bunch of other stuff as well, like loads of random stuff you can buy for laurels as well. And it's kind of a good way to get a few pieces of ascended gear if you're really new to the game, but it's a little bit outdated. There are easier and less time-gatey ways of gearing up these days with this. Oh, and that reminds me, they're also used for buying certain crafting recipes too as well. But yeah, they're kind of like a weird utility currency that you get for logging into the game, right? Listen, if you're playing Guild Wars 2, you better get used to this. There's loads of very convoluted, slightly bizarre currencies, like literally over 100 of them. So buckle up. Here we go.
I feel like just that explanation, we went over so many things that I missed. Okay, runes and sigils. Go.
I think the really good way to actually explain this is actually in the context of other MMOs. Runes are just set bonuses. That's what they are.
Yeah.
You attach them to gear, they give you a set bonus. You should probably use 6 of the same one. A lot of people don't do that. You probably should. Yeah, they're upgrade components, right? And they typically give you a passive bonus and maybe like a proc, right? So maybe when you get hit, you get boons or something like that. Or maybe you run a little bit faster, or maybe you get more stats, right? Loads of crazy, wild bonuses. There's some pretty interesting ones in there as well. But broadly speaking, put them on your gear. They make you better. They're another part of the build process, a little bit more customization. Very useful, very good, very important. Sigils are a little bit different. They're upgrade components again, but they're for weapons instead. And they typically have a active effect, right? So on a critical strike, something happens. On weapon swapping, something happens, right? On getting a kill, something happens. Maybe your conditions last a little bit longer while you've got that weapon equipped, right? Maybe your CCs, your crowd control, lasts a little bit longer while you've got that weapon equipped. That sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And something happens. Well, we could get into a little bit more detail, but I feel like this would be a really long podcast about certain things that you guys in chat already know. Although, to be fair, is it a sigil or a rune that's like the pirate one with the parrot? Is that a sigil
that's a rune.
or a rune?
That's a rune.
Is it a rune? Okay. Well, something happens with that too.
Yeah, they're typically runes are typically not always, because some of them do have triggers. Say using your heal skill, for example, or using your elite skill will trigger them. But a lot of the time they're more passive focused, whereas sigils tend to be, a lot of them tend to activate when you do something, right? Some of them are passive as well, so it's not entirely all the way there. But a lot of sigils are like, oh, when you get a critical strike, you get like a thunderbolt, right? Hit someone, right? Or you just get like more damage, right? All the time when you've got that weapon equipped. It's a bit more contextual, whereas runes will always be active in your build, whereas sigils will only be active while you're on that weapon set. Actually, top tip for new players here as well, by the way. The game doesn't telegraph this very well, but weapon swapping is actually any time your weapons, your skills on the left-hand side of the HP orb change. So in other words, if you change attunement on Ellie, that's a weapon swap. If you go in Celestial Avatar on Druid, that's a weapon swap. If you change... and here's another one that breaks the rules here a little bit. If you swap Legends on Rev, even though it doesn't change your weapon skills, still counts, right, as a weapon swap. But in general, that's the rule. So weapon swapping is a little bit more than just the exact weapon swap mechanic. It can be other things as well that are linked to profession mechanics.
And going over that as well, for anyone that doesn't know, weapon swapping changes your abilities, like we just said. And you can swap your weapons on certain classes. That was a good one. I didn't even think about that, and that's a major one.
It is. It's a really big one, yeah. That's a really fun one for Ellie as well. This is so funny for poor old Ellie, because Elementalist, whenever you swap attunements, you also proc confusion. So if like a mirage goes on you, gives you like 10 stacks of confusion. I've got some bad news for you. That's going to activate confusion like every single time you change attunements. Unlucky, okay? You hate to see it.
Thank you. I needed that in my life. I appreciate it. And we did kind of briefly go over a little bit of season 1 and just that it's not in the game anymore. But people normally in an MMO, they have, their story patches and then their big expansions. And even though Living World and Icebreed Saga could essentially be what we would call story patches in another MMO, do you have a little bit of a better way to elaborate on that and what they actually are for new players and how they would unlock those?
Living World specifically, or season 1?
Living World specifically, Living World and Icebreed.
Living World, think of it as the way ArenaNet releases like content in between expansions. Like in a way, Living World kind of is an expansion, but broken up into little chunks, because they typically even have features attached to them, right? They might add like a new mount, right? Or they'll add a new mastery that does something. They'll add a piece of legendary gear, right? Like it's an episodic form of content that typically has new areas to explore, new achievements, new things to fight, new loot to collect, right? Story content, instance content like a fractal might come with it, a raid might get bundled with it, right? An update to PvP might come with it, or world versus world, right? They are essentially periodic updates to the game, okay, that have a bunch of stuff in them related, can be anything, right? Pretty much, but usually story driven, progresses the story, gives you new stuff to explore. Incredible, right? It's more content broken up into chunks. Think of a Living World season as kind of an expansion's worth of content. That's going to be a very hot take because it isn't quite that really. It's kind of like expansion light, right? Is the way it is really. And it's actually very generous with this too. So if you're a new player, you have sadly not benefited from this generosity. But whenever they release new content, if you own the game and you log in during the time where that content is going live or is the most recent piece of content, you unlock it for free. So even if you say you don't really care about the game anymore, right? You're like kind of taking a break. Just log in whenever there's an update and you'll unlock that content for free. If you don't do that, you actually have to pay gems. Now, funnily enough, actually, this is actually some of the cheapest things they sell on the gem store. So a lot of some of the gems are like a mount skin. Might cost you 2,000 gems, which is actually quite a lot of money, right? For a blade mount skin, right? What the hell's going on there, right? But a Living World episode will actually cost you 200 gems. So a full season will cost you 1,200 gems to unlock because they typically have 6 episodes per season, right? There as well. And actually, at the time of recording right now, they're actually re-releasing old content for free right now. So log in right now and get some free content. But yeah, all the content that's ever been added to the game outside of season 1, which is why I asked about that at the start, which is a little bit weird because it wasn't quite like all the other content in the game, although it might actually make its return at some point. It's been creeping back into the game over time. But all of that can simply be unlocked for gems. And big note here as well, that you actually don't have to spend real money on that too. 200 gems actually isn't that much gold. If I had to guess, that's probably like a little over 100 gold at a rough estimate, I think, right now, which is actually equates to like 5 hours of farming, right? Like 20 gold an hour is pretty standard for a lot of the farming you can do in the game. So you can unlock all this content for free by playing if you don't want to spend real money, because of the way you can buy gems in Guild Wars 2 for the in-game currency gold instead of using real money. Use real money if you want, obviously, but you don't have to.
And actually, I mentioned going off of your season 1 when you were talking about it to go over the rest of Living World first, because I wanted to go back to why season 1 was taken out of the game, possibly if we could, and just go over some things that are left over. I know that you can go back to a little bit in a Fractal. I know there are still some areas that are in the game that were technically part of season 1, and a couple of... Yeah, I mean, pretty much that, just for people who know whenever someone talks about season 1, if they're a new player.
So the original design philosophy for Guild Wars 2 was, to be frank, ambitious to the point of utter insanity. So the original design idea was that there would be no expansions in Guild Wars 2, which obviously didn't stay around for very long, and that they would actually change the world with every update every 2 weeks. And that was Living Story Season 1. So maps would change permanently. Content would only be around for like 2 weeks and then go away permanently. And this continued for a while until the devs realized that, oh my goodness, we can't sustain this. We're going to actually die. And that was when they decided to go to a more episodic and permanent format, which was Season 2, and then move into expansions with Heart of Thorns shortly after that. It was a bit of a bumpy ride with some content drought as they kind of reevaluated the situation. But that's the long and the short of it when it comes to Season 1. The reason the content isn't here is because it literally got removed. They are starting to bring it back. For example, they added a world boss back called the Twisted Marionette, which was a very, very popular world boss from back in the day, which of course got removed, right? Because the story actually moved on. And don't get me wrong, like, it was an amazing idea, right? I've got to say, I did appreciate Living Story Season 1 for what it was, because it was like, whoa, the world is changing, right? Like, there was a map this map called Kessex Hills, and it will be very unusual for new players who go there because it's basically been completely wrecked, right? And destroyed. And there's no context behind that. But what actually happened is that one of the villains of Living Story actually made like a giant tower there. And part of the story was going in there and basically blowing it up. But blowing it up kind of like completely annihilated the landscape there and completely warped it. It used to be this very kind of green, luscious area, right? But it kind of got all corrupted and horrible with like broken stuff all over the place because of this massive event that happened. And there's no remnant of that left over. And obviously, this is again, Living Story Season 1, the idea was amazing as long as you were there, right? If you miss it, then it's gone, right? And obviously, it meant that they weren't ever adding like new content to the game that stuck around because it would literally only last 2 weeks before they like deleted it from the game, right? Which is maybe not the best idea in an MMO, guys, okay? Little spoiler there for you. In that regard, but it was actually really cool at the time and brought some pretty interesting features to the game. In fact, one thing that I absolutely loved, I love stuff like this. It's something that I was actually very excited to be a part of in Classic WoW 2. One-time events that are one-time only, and you have to be there, otherwise it's gone. There's this weird species of crustacean known as Karka. They're kind of like giant crabs, and there was this event. It's one of the first things they actually released in Living Story Season 1 in an episode called Lost Shores. And you had to basically battle like the ultimate Karka queen, right? Like the legendary Omega Karka matriarch. And it was a one-time event. The event, like a big meta event, right? In Guild Wars 2, you have these bosses that go round and round and round and round and round. This was one time, right? And I remember it wasn't actually that late. It was like 10 p.m. But listen, guys, like I was a lot younger back then. 10 p.m. that was past my bedtime, right? Okay, I had a long day at school. I was tired, but I remember staying up to do this, and it was it was epic, but it was unplayable. There was so many people there that it was like 3 FPS. I was playing on a potato PC, 3 FPS. The server lag was so bad that you would use like one ability every 10 seconds, and then an invisible Karka that didn't even render would one-shot you. But we got there in the end, and the really special thing about this was that it had a very high chance to give you a precursor to make a legendary, which at the time was extraordinarily difficult to obtain because farming gold at the start of the game was much harder, very, very arduous, very grindy compared to these days. And I got the Warhorn one. Unlucky. Okay, it wasn't worth that much at the time, but a lot of people got some insane gains for their legendary. They're getting the great sword, or the legend, right? The staff one there as well. And also bonus meme. It was bugged. It turned out if you kept relogging, you could get into different maps and actually loot the chest over and over again. So some people got like 8 precursors and made like thousands of gold. Okay, wow. Those people, screw them. Okay, but anyway. It was pretty epic. And, it's funny, actually, because was that incredibly scuffed and incredibly messed up and very, very broken? Yes, but I'll always remember that. And I think there's definitely a bit of a happy medium, right? There's a happy medium by having content that stays there forever and content that is a little bit more transient. And it's like, oh, yeah, I was there, man. I was there for that, right? When that happened, when that came out, I was there during that event within the game. And, that was the same thing, actually, in Classic WoW. There's this horrible quest, okay, like it's one of the most like pain-inducing quests ever made. It's called Scarab Lord. I actually didn't complete the quest myself, but I did help my guild do it. I helped my guild. I was there for all the events, for all the bosses, right, and all that kind of stuff.
And they got the titles.
Oh yeah, I got the title. Yeah, like we got a guy a title there, but it involved basically killing like 30,000 insects. Okay, I actually think it's more than that. It's like 100,000 bugs, right? That's part of the quest. It's a lot of fun there, guys. But you have to do it because if you don't, the first person completes it on your server, you have 12 hours to complete it. Otherwise, you can't complete it anymore. Unlucky, buddy. And it's pretty epic. Like that, I will always remember. I will always remember grinding bugs to help my guild. I will always remember preventing other people from completing the quest because it was actually our revenge. I played on a PvP server in Classic WoW, and a very famous guild, honestly one of the greatest guilds ever made, a Swedish guild by the name of Hantabart. and they were a griefing guild. So they would run around like deliberately killing people to ruin their experience, dispelling people's world buffs so they couldn't play raids properly, killing them so they can't even get to the raid, ganking, and just generally being a nuisance. And I'm actually very proud to say, I'm sorry, Hunterbot, I apologize. I was there griefing them, preventing them from completing the achievement. And yes, that guild, Hunterbot, the leader of that guild, he was unable to actually complete the quest. And, you know, he ran out of time and simply could not get the title and could not get the mount at the end there. So justice was served there towards the end of the Scarab Lord adventure on the server of Gehenna. So you absolutely love to see that. Very, very good content. But, you know, yeah, is that very, very high effort for, you know, something that isn't there permanently? Absolutely. But is it something that I'll always remember and a massive part of not only the story of my experience with that game, but also even of the server, right, of the community? Absolutely. Yes, it is, right? So that's why I think, yeah, there's a lot of things you can bash about Season 1, and it probably is good that it's gone. But the idea was very, very solid. It was just maybe a little bit too extreme. Bit of a tangent there, but I think it's worth it because it is one of those things that is a fascinating part of the game's history and a fascinating part of how MMOs and communities work in general. It's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, and actually for anyone that doesn't know, there are a couple of videos out that document the story of that on YouTube for if you're planning on just going through the whole story and you're really interested in lore. There's also an NPC in-game that kind of gives you a little bit of a synopsis with a bit different cinematic, and it's kind of told in a little bit more exposition that's pretty good too. I mean, it's not terrible, but definitely if you want to get the full story from YouTube, I would say would probably be your best bet. But...
Oh, yeah. I know, funny enough, I think they haven't explicitly confirmed this, but I think they will actually slowly bring this stuff back. Because if you're a new player, the game is just straight up incomplete, right? Like, if you're a new player, you basically get dumped in and you complete the core game, right? But then you go straight to Season 2 after you beat Zaitan, right? In the core game, it will say, hey, go do Season 2. But the really weird part about that is that you'll immediately meet characters who know you, but you'll have no idea who they are, right? Yep. And loads of events have happened, but you've got no idea what happened, right? When you're playing that, you're like, what? Huh? And
right.
So I think, but particularly when they're looking at launching on Steam, right? They're looking to kind of open the game up to this big new audience, right? With loads of new players. I would be very surprised if they aren't working on fully bringing Season 1 back in some form or another. Maybe not quite the same way that it was originally, but if they didn't tell the story, I'd be amazed. Because as of right now, the new player story experience is just plain bizarre. You can't really compress all of Season 1 into like a 3-minute cutscene. It's simply impossible, right? And that's reflected in the length of the YouTubers. If you do look on YouTube, you'll see that the videos that document Season 1 are actually quite long, right? It's got a lot happen, right? There's a lot of story went down, a lot of events. There's a lot of content that actually got added to the game during this, during Season 1. So that's it. And yeah, actually, I do agree with Inks, by the way. Like, one thing that you can do to kind of like get that transient feel, but also have the long-term stuff, is to have like really big events, like going, you know, the first time you kill a boss, the first time you clear a raid, the first time this happens, right? It's really, really cool. Like these big macro events, huge group content there as well. It's very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about how the kind of the leveling experience in the story is a little bit scuffed, I think one of the big ones also is the dungeons. I was actually talking about doing a video purely on this to talk about when you're supposed to do certain dungeons within the story, because you get the mail earlier for a lot of dungeons before you actually experience that portion of the story. So that's kind of another area where this happens. And I don't know, people said it used to line up better, and I don't know what happened to make it so it didn't line up. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. This, okay, sorry, ain't it? You know, I apologize, but this is gonna hurt. I'm gonna have to go hard. I'm gonna have to activate. One of the most horrific mistakes the developers ever made was changing the story from a level by level basis that kind of pulled you through the world into blocks of story every 10 levels. This completely desynchronized it with the leveling experience and just kind of like, you know, if you're between stories, it kind of like, oh yeah, you've got nothing to do, by the way, go level up, right? It's like, oh, eh? Whereas when I played through the game, I always had that next green star. right? Even if it was too high level for me, it was like, level 37, I was only level 31. I had it. I was like, oh, that's where I've got to go next. Right? I've got to level up, then go there, right? I didn't ever have like that big gap of leveling up where you don't have any story to pull you through the game. And yes, it did line up a little bit better with dungeons because of this, because you had this slightly more granular approach to story, whereas now it's in blocks of 10. But wait, the dungeons aren't in blocks of 10. Some of them are in, like some of them are like level 35. Some of them level 45, right? Some of them level 55. Not in blocks of 10. And that's why it's desynchronized. And this is actually, this is a bit of a weird meme here actually, and I'm not sure how Ainit would feel about this, but I actually view this as a huge mistake because this is something that I did when I leveled up. I was like, oh, dungeons are endgame, right? I'll go back and do them later. So I basically leveled to 80, and then I went to do the dungeons. But this is actually a huge mistake because really important story things happen in the story mode of these dungeons. If you don't play through the story as you're leveling up, you will actually have massive plot holes. For example, the core game, what it's really about is basically about the aftermath of a previous battle against Kralkatorrik that broke up this guild, Destiny's Edge. Everyone basically got all salty with each other because Logan, one of the characters, Logan Thackeray, is a simp. And left his friends to die and went to, go over to his queen instead of actually saving his best friends. Big mistake there. So they all hated each other after that because one of their best friends died, Snaff. And the really big part of the core story is actually the reunion of these friends into a team to fight Zaitan, the main antagonist of the first story. But oh no. If you don't play through the dungeons, you actually don't see this. They just basically become friends again and like rock up and say, oh yeah, we all like each other. Now let's go fight Zaitan. You only encounter like the relationships between these characters when you play through the dungeons. If I was going to suggest one thing actually, and I 100% think they should do this, they should make it so that you have to play through the dungeons as part of the story. They should integrate that in immediately because otherwise, you actually miss out on very crucial plot points because the story mode is actually directly linked to the main storyline of the core game there as well.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that they do in Final Fantasy XIV. You have the main story, and then after a portion of the main story, there's a dungeon you have to do at least once before you move on as well. And it's just because there's so much story in that as well. But I did have a question in chat, which was something I was going to get to. And since we were already talking about dungeons, let's go over fractals. And then someone was asking what you think about the future of fractals, and do you see development actually working on fractals further, especially with the success of Sunqua Peak?
You know what's funny actually? You say the success of Sunqua Peak. Do you know that Sunqua Peak is actually one of the least played fractal?
Because it actually has mechanics.
Yeah, and the challenge mode is...
that was a joke.
And the challenge mode is the least played, one of the least played piece of content in the entire game. Something
but
that,
I feel like everybody that's done it, they really enjoy it. Like I've heard nothing but good things about it.
Yeah, because it's really cool, but it's also kind of a bit of a step up from a lot of other pieces of content in the game. Bit of a shock. And in terms of what fractals are they're dungeons, but they already had dungeons, but they wanted to make something new, so they couldn't call it dungeons, so they called it fractals instead. And funnily enough, actually, something I already hear. I always hear this, right? It's like, oh, it's like Mythic Plus from WoW. No, Mythic Plus actually is a rip-off of Fractals. Guild Wars 2 had it first,
yeah.
funnily enough, actually. And yeah, basically it's this idea of scaling difficulty, right? And it's a very good idea, right? Let tier 1 starts out really easy, level 1 Fractal, all the way up to level 100, gets progressively harder. It's a very good idea. But yeah, it's basically scalable dungeons with loads of different little ones. Kind of like a bit more quickfire, very short, very quick-paced. Dungeons that got some bosses in them, get loads of loot, right? Daily gated, right? To get even more rewards, right? You get bonus rewards when you do them every day. And they also have like weird mechanics, like sometimes the enemies blow up, sometimes you get bombs on them that you explode, sometimes you're really small and don't have much HP, sometimes the enemies get boons, sometimes the enemies blow up, right? All that kind of stuff, right? That's what fractals are fundamentally. They're dungeons but called fractals instead, and they scale, and there's loads of them. And they actually have some pretty cool lore too, actually. Fun fact. But, I guess that's for another time. In terms of development, I think they'll definitely go for more fractals in the future. I think 5-man instance content is the absolute backbone of basically any MMO. Really, like dungeons they're, everyone wants dungeons for a reason, right? Because that is what you do in an MMO. You grind dungeons, you farm dungeons. So they'll definitely do more. I think they're actually exploring a lot of types of content for Ender Dragons, like strike missions for the 10-man stuff, for big bosses, and then Fractals will be coming out there as well. Will there be loads of them? Probably not. I mean, like maybe you'll get like 2 a year. I mean, you don't want to know like the release schedule for Fractals, guys. It's been a little bit rough. I think it's been well over a year since the last Fractal. There's actually a site you can do to check this, by the way. It's called itsonTheTable.github.io. Yeah, it's been 400 days since Sunqua Peak. Feels pretty bad. 862 days since the last raid wing, and 512 days since the last strike mission. That's a bit of an oofy right there. You hate to see it. But the future of it, yeah, I think there will be new Fractals, probably with challenge modes sometimes, not all the time, but certainly sometimes. I could imagine them actually adding a tier 5 Fractal, but to be frank, if you're looking for that really challenging experience, it's probably not really on ArenaNet's radar right now, simply because the player base isn't really into that sort of thing. Sunqua Peak really demonstrates that, because it is a bit of a step up from other Fractals, and people don't play it. They're scared of it. It's kind of hard, particularly on challenge mode. So realistically, I think it will be that kind of like entry-level, more casual-oriented 5-man content in the future. Maybe if the population grows and people really start getting engaged and learning the game, better tutorials, like more guides, more streamers, more videos, whatever it takes, right? Better community, better guilds. If that happens, then I could see them starting to push the boat out a little bit and say, you know what, tier 5 Fractals. Right? Oh yeah, we're going to go back and add challenge modes. At that point, I could see it. But as of right now, I think it'll be like 1 or 2 Fractals a year. Some with challenge mode, some without challenge mode, but nothing too crazy in that regard, because that's simply not the area that the player base, as it stands right now, is ultra engaged with.
And since we were already discussing it, I do have a new player in chat who said the person's been playing for a couple of months and doesn't understand why we call dungeons different names. So like between dungeons, fractals, and strikes. So if we just want to differentiate between the three so people know what they're getting themselves into when they essentially sign up for each.
Because, simply put, ArenaNet, they are very, very proud of their reinvented wheel collection. This is something that the game has actually really suffered with for a long time, is that they still haven't really figured out what they want to do with PvE, right? Even now in the expansion, they're heavily experimenting, right? They're saying, oh, we're going to do strike missions now with challenge modes, right? To kind of give you that raid level experience. When you're going there, but that will still essentially be another new wheel for the collection, right? They're trying something. They're trying an additional thing to layer that on top, and that's why. The reason is because ArenaNet historically dungeons got scrapped. Then Fractals kind of like, oh no, Fractals, let's do raids instead. No, how about strike missions? How about dragon response missions? How about strikes again? They've never made up their mind, and that's why you've got those different names. But yeah, I agree. It's actually one of the problems with the game. It's very confusing for new players because there are all these different things that are kind of the same, but not really, a little bit different, a little bit of a different flavor, different reward structure, different content types, like different like map design, right? Like encounter design. It is a little bit on the weird side. It's very non-linear too, like very non-linear. Like you might go, oh, strike missions are harder than Fractals, right? Because they've got 10 players, and 10-man missions are harder than 5-man content, right? No, not really. Sunqua Peak and the Fractal challenge modes, I would say, are harder than basically every strike mission, for example, and that's 5-man content, right? And this weird content path is something that really trips up a lot of players, and I'd really like to see ArenaNet improve on that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, guys. This is literally like the 3rd podcast I've done live. Thank you for the raid. I love that your raid your raid message is pub crawl. That's amazing. And the sub, I appreciate it. But we actually, going off of Fractals, and hopefully they have, people were talking about more challenging stuff for strikes, like having the challenge modes and things like that. We did have someone asking your thoughts on if they will ever make Fractals like unending again, to the point where you could do it as a gauntlet and it wasn't just tier 4, that you could just go past that and do as many as you wanted, and it would just keep increasing in difficulty.
I don't think they'll ever go back to that system. No. They won't do that. I could see them adding tier 5, but I don't think they'll completely revert that. What I could see them doing is making them competitive. This is a bit of a meme, but there was always this idea of like fractal leaderboards, right? This concept of speedrun challenges. I could see them implementing something like that, like, ooh, what's the weekly best fractal clear, right? And have guilds kind of compete over that. So kind of like a bit of that gauntlet competitive element with other players. But going back to that old system, I very much doubt it.
And I think one of the other biggest questions that I get are mainly about consumables, kind of like how luck works in the game, essentially. Like the more that you consume, what the actual duration is.
So, I mean, luck is permanent, right? Like there's this concept of magic find in the game, and it's actually very poorly telegraphed, right? I don't know why it's like this, by the way, like genuinely bizarre. So you have an account attribute called magic find, and you'll see it in your hero panel, and it will read something like 20%, right? Or 100%. And it basically increases the chance that you get higher quality items. And what that means is basically like a better color of item, right? So you have gray items for trash items, you have the white items for like, it's a regular item. You have blue, green, yellow, orange, and then you've got, ascended and legendary, right? Magic find basically increases the odds that you're going to get a better tier of item, right? So, it will give you more greens, right, essentially, instead of getting a blue item, right? Or more blues instead of a basic item, right? That's what Magic Find does. But it actually does it in a pretty weird way. So you might think, I've got 100% Magic Find. That means I get double chance, right? No. The players have actually researched that. And by the way, the devs actually said that's how it works. That's not true. Players have done research on this, and it turns out that to double your chances of getting, a higher quality item, you actually need 1,000% Magic Find. And actually, what it means is that basically when you see 100%, it actually means 10%. Magic Find is 10 times worse than it actually says on the UI. I'm not sure if that's maybe some kind of like weird bug that they never fixed, or some kind of like weird thing that maybe they didn't even completely understand it themselves. But yeah, that's basically the thing with Magic Find. And luck is basically what fuels your account-wide Magic Find. So you have two variants of Magic Find. You can get it from buffs, like using boosters, using food, banners, loads of other stuff there as well. Other kind of unique effects to increase your Magic Find. And you have account-wide Magic Find. This is permanent and not contingent on buffs or consumables. And there are two ways you can do this. You can complete achievements. And the more achievements you get like extra rewards every 500 achievement points, and that will gradually increase your Magic Find, and also other things like XP gain, karma gain, even coin gain, right? You can drop more coin from killing mobs. And the luck system. So the luck system is basically something that you can use to permanently increase your luck up to a maximum of plus 300%, right? Permanent luck. And the way you do this is by consuming luck. And luck is just found from salvaging items. So basically, whenever you salvage like a green or a blue item, then it will spew out some luck at you. And you eat that, you right-click, consume, and boom, your overall luck goes up. And, every, few thousand luck that you consume, it gives you another 1% Magic Find, all the way up to 300. It basically curves up. It's like an exponential curve, capping out at 30,000 per percentage. And then after that, it's a straight flat grind all the way to 300% Magic Find. Definitely worth doing, by the way. It really does pay off after a while. It's very noticeable. I can promise you that. Like, even though it is only a 30% gain, because 300 divided by 10, right, for 30%, it is actually very significant, and it will massively add up. So salvage your items, consume your luck, and you will see long-term gains by adding up your Magic Find. Particularly seeing as like the first kind of 100% are very quick, because again, it's in like an exponential curve for more luck. So right at the start, like you'll level up super fast, right? Super fast.
And I feel like just for new players, we should go back to the basic, little features of the game, and even essentially just like things that you can spend. So I would say karma as well, because I feel like a lot of players don't know like what you have karma for, that it's actually used as a currency, and where you would spend it.
Karma is weirdly obsolete these days. It was much more important in the core game because it was a very core component of buying legendaries. You needed this currency called, this material called obsidian shards. to craft legendaries. You need like 500 of them or something like that, or like 480. And they cost 2,100 karma each. And that was a lot, right? Because you need like nearly 1 million karma, right, to make your legendary. That was a lot of karma back in the day to craft a legendary. However, these days, obsidian shards are much more common. They kind of get spewed at you by just playing the game normally, like get loads of them in Fractals, PvP, world versus world, pretty much doing loads of stuff, you'll get obsidian shards. So karma is a little bit less useful in that regard. It typically just piles up. You can use it to buy things like miniatures, right? Like certain, unique items from heart vendors, right? All that kind of stuff. But it's actually a lot less relevant than it used to be. It's just kind of like a pretty thing that you can see that adds up while you do events. There are a few ways you can turn it to gold, but they're typically very, very click intensive and not much fun unless you're a bot. And unless there are any beep boops in the chat, I wouldn't really recommend it. There is one thing that you can do every day, which is a bit of a chore, but it will actually be an incredibly efficient use of your time if you care about gold. There's a very misunderstood thing, or people don't even know about this mechanic actually. Every map in the entire game in Guild Wars 2 has basically a reward track attached to it, right? Just like PvP or World versus World. So completing events in that map, after a while, will give you bonus rewards for doing a bunch of events. And there's this thing that you can buy every day from 5 vendors called packed outfitters, or like packed supply agents is what it's called. And you can buy packed scout mapping thingies for karma every day, 5 times. And what that does is when you use it in a map, it progresses your reward track. So if you save up loads of these things and go to a map that has like a really juicy reward track, you can turn your karma into gold very effectively after a time there as well. But karma, surprisingly not that bad. It's not something that I expect many players to really have difficulty with anymore, because Arena kind of like noticed that a lot of people did have problems with karma. It was like very grindy to like really spam out events to get loads of karma at the start of the game. So they introduced a lot of sources for obsidian shards into the game that kind of really nuked the main drain of this currency from the players. Most players won't have any difficulty with karma whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that I get is salvage kits. I actually had an instance when I was talking about this that people, A, didn't know what salvage kits were for, and B, once they actually heard people talking about the copper-fed salvage kits, they didn't realize that it was the copper currency. They thought that the only thing you could try to salvage was like copper ore. And so they got really confused. So if we were to just go over that for everybody.
So salvage kits they're kind of a concept that existed in Guild Wars 1, and it came over to Guild Wars 2. A salvage kit is a consumable item, or a permanent one if you buy it from the gem store, that will break an item down into materials. So you can, if you've got like a piece of cloth armor, it will turn it into a cloth material that you can then sell or use to craft something, for example. That's what a salvage kit is. You also get luck too, incidentally, which is what we were just talking about. But yeah, that's what a salvage kit is. And when it comes to like the copper fed one, basically there are different tiers of salvage kit. So a basic one like has a lower chance to get good materials and get upgrade components, because it can also get the runes and sigils out of weapons and armor. So you can salvage the runes and sigils, which you can then sell, or you can then use to upgrade your gear, for example. And the basic ones aren't that good, right? But they're very cheap, right? So they're good for salvaging kind of low value items. But like the more expensive salvage kits, like the rare ones, like the yellow salvage kit, the exotic salvage kit, these ones are very, very useful if you want to salvage high value items. For example, one thing that's really good is that yellow items, rare items, when you salvage them, so rare and exotic, you get globs of ectoplasm, which is a very key currency in loads of crafting and just in the economy in general. And that's why you'll always see people say, oh yeah, if you've got rare items, use a rare salvage kit, because that will give you the best chance, best bang for your buck at getting these ectoplasms out of rare items. But for lower quality items, not really worth the money to spend a really high tier salvage kit. Use a basic salvage kit. And that's translated into the gem store ones as well. The copper-fed salvage-o-matic, instead of having limited charges and you have to buy a new one, it costs money every time you use it. By the way, it's cheaper than buying the equivalent salvage kit from the vendor, by the way. So it's cheaper. You save money by using the copper-fed. It actually really adds up. It's one of those items that can very easily pay for itself over a long period of time. If you're playing the game for like a year, you'll definitely get value out of this item, even if you buy it with gold. And it's the same as a basic salvage kit. And the silver-fed salvage-o-matic is exactly that. It costs a bit more gold to use. I think it's like 80 silver to use it. But it is the same as a rare salvage kit instead. So in other words, you can use it on your rare items and exotic items to get ectoplasms. Although I wouldn't necessarily recommend salvaging exotics. Typically, you'll be selling those directly because they might actually be in demand by players there as well. And again, like the rare salvage kit has a higher chance of getting good materials and a higher chance of getting those ectoplasms out from the item.
Right. And just going off of items in your inventory, a lot of people have also asked me about trophy items, the different trophy items, and what you should keep and what you should just discard, because there's quite a few of them that you can't sell.
Yeah, okay. This is it's funny how new players kind of point out really weird gimmicks in the game, right? This is a really good example of one. So trophy items are basically for events, right? Think of them as quest items, but dynamic quest items. So they're not really an item that you can sell or do anything with. They're used only for an event, right? Maybe you have to collect devourer eggs, right? You're doing an event in the open world for devourer eggs. You'll actually pick up a physical item and then hand in that physical item to an NPC to complete that event. But after the event is over, the item is completely useless. If you see trophy item, delete it, right? Unless you're doing the event, obviously don't do it,
Right.
Use it for the event, right? But delete it afterwards. It doesn't do anything.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of people talk about this, especially with new streamers, but I feel like for new players, they might not know about this. So the /wiki command.
I think players would really get a lot of use out of this. Like, this is a really cool integration. Like, the wiki isn't directly official by Arena. It's maintained by players, but it is heavily endorsed by Arena, which is super cool to see. And typing the /wiki, if you do /wiki in the chat window, and then type anything in the game, like, what is might, the boon, right? What is weakness? What is quickness? What does that do? Like, how does that work? Or look up an ability, like, I just got hit by a warrior in PvP, right? And they hit me with full counter. What the hell is that? What's that ability? If you go ahead and do /wiki, anything in the game, it will just open a window in your browser, and then it will tell you a page directly about what it is that just killed you. Very cool.
Very cool. And I actually had another one that people were kind of talking about in chat as well earlier. A commander tag and a catmander tag, and also how it used to be called the apple tag.
Yeah, so there are a few things here. Basically, there are ways that the Arena added to the game that allow players to organize themselves. The original version of this was the commander tag. Then they also added the mentor tag as well, and even squads that don't have tags. Basically, commander tag is something that you can pay some gold to get, and it lets you appear on the map so people can see that, there's someone doing something over here. And it allows you to have a really big group of players, up to 50, that you can lead around all over the place. The Catmander tag is just a cosmetic variant of this. Basically, it's a bit of a meme, right? It's honestly like a joke in a way that Aina added this. It's basically the exact same thing as a commander tag, but it's got cat ears, right? So if you're a Final Fantasy enjoyer and you like cat boys and cat girls, you can role play as a Catmander. Hell yeah. And the Apple tag is something that they added to allow players to kind of do this and indicate presence. Hey, there's something going on, and hey, I'll even teach you that anyone can use. Anyone can tag up with us at any time. The mentor tag, and it marks you on there with a little apple, right? You're a fresh player. You're going to bite into the juicy apple of Guild Wars 2, and I will teach you things if I've got the mentor tag. Doesn't actually see that much use really for its actual reason. It's more often used for drawing penises on the map more than its actual intended use to guide players through the game. But it is a pretty cool feature that some people will use to kind of help newer players in the starting areas and kind of just indicate that there's something going on and a player that will be willing to explain things and help them through the world.
I feel like that was all I had from the suggestions. So I did have a couple of meme that we could answer if we wanted to. But people, when I asked what their favorite Guild Wars 2 term was, or something that they see a lot in the game that new people might not know, we got a lot of Steve, Bubbles, and what was the other one? Now I'm not going to remember. Yeah, no, it was pretty much Steve and Bubbles, honestly. if we wanted to go over that.
I mean, that's actually a reference to the same character, I think. Anyway, so there is basically an unknown dragon. Like all the dragons outside of the underwater dragon are known. No one knows what it's called, so people call it Stephen Bubbles, right? You know, as a term for like, oh, we don't know what it's called. In fact, it's definitely speculated that in fact it's very likely that we're going to encounter this character in Cantha in End of Dragons. It's kind of in the name. In that regard there as well. So that's definitely expected to be rocking up there as well. This is also heavily hinted at as well because there's some artwork that recently got reused, amazing artwork by the way, of a kind of multi-headed dragon made out of water attacking a city that was used for End of Dragons. So it's highly expected that we encounter the legendary Bubbles. And incidentally, lore-wise as well, one of the reasons why we haven't been able to go to Cantha lore-wise is because the deep sea dragon, as it's referred to, Bubbles and Steve, right, is actually basically blockading any way to actually reach Cantha. Hence why people also think it will be a heavily involved character in some way in the End of Dragon storyline.
And then the last one I had, just because the way you level it up is very different than what you are leveling up as an end result, was Masteries.
Masteries, yeah, these are what I was trying to think of a good thing. I was going to say Castlevania, but everyone watching this is a Zoomer. Okay, no one knows what that is. Unfortunate. But basically, or rather, Metroidvania actually would be a better way of putting it. But yeah, Masteries are essentially extended leveling at the end of the game. So after you get max level, it's basically something that experience does. Experience will allow you to put mastery points that you get for doing various tasks around the end game, particularly in expansions, that allow you to unlock horizontal abilities for your character, like gliding, bouncing on mushrooms, talking to frogs, riding mounts, and doing other things in the living story, like talking to owls and stuff like that. It's another form of, grind that will cause your character to unlock new abilities that are account-wide as well. So it's an account-wide progression system.
I love how everyone in chat's loving the Zoomers comment, and I'm over here going, well, this video is going to get demonetized. We called people simps and Zoomers and... But yeah, I feel like that was all I had. Did you have anything?
I said way worse on Tea Time. You'll be fine. Don't worry.
I'm just joking for the most part.
I say way worse on a daily basis.
I've said some things that got clipped that I deleted because I wasn't sure.
Oh, really? What did you say? You got to repeat it now.
I can't say them again.
Let's clip it again.
No, I can't say it again, but it was during the first time I PvP'd.
Oh. I see. I mean, it all makes sense now. Okay, I see where you're going with that. Okay, I know what's going on.
When I first started playing, everybody, stay out of PvP. The PvP lobby, chat's toxic, and I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. And then I'm the one that ends up being toxic when I PvP, apparently. So, but have you seen anything else that we haven't covered, which I know was quite a bit because it's been like 2 hours, which I appreciate you doing this so early in the morning, by the way. That you've seen people maybe have trouble with, or maybe something that you missed when you were a new player that would be good advice to give to new players now as well?
You know the thing that got me? I'm going to leak this. I'm going to expose myself here. Thing that, because I was playing Elementalist, and the one thing that kind of like bamboozled me in the first few hours of playing the game, so like first few kind of like moments of playing the game, and the early stages when I was learning how things work, is that I would always like mistake vigor for regeneration and vice versa. That I distinctly remember this, right? Because I was using Scepter. I was using Scepter Dagger. I was like, dude, this is pretty cool. Phoenix, Dragon's Tooth, uses some dank abilities. Do Fire Grab as well, though, with Dagger off on my Ellie. This is pretty good. This is a good time, right? I like these moves. And I would use Phoenix. I was like, dude, why is my Phoenix not healing me? This is bullshit. And it's kind of a partial reason for that is because, funny enough, in Guild Wars 1, Phoenix actually heals you. So I kind of expected it to do the same thing there as well. But it's going to, eventually I was like, oh, wait, no, it's the leaf, dude. It's the leaf. It's not the same thing as the Healy arrows. What the hell, man? And then I just figured that out. But yeah, that was one thing that at the start of the game, like I was like, dude, why is Vigor not healing me? Like, what the hell is this? Because it's Vigor, not Regen. That's why. There you go. In terms of like the stuff that I think
Exposed.
that I would really point out as people don't get, it's how combat works and how boons work. We kind of went over this, but I guess I'd just reiterate it. Yeah. Dodge things, move a lot, because movement's very important, and boons are very good, and so are conditions. And the thing that I think people really struggle with in this game, this is not even necessarily something that people don't understand, it's something that people can't do. It's moving and attacking at the same time. I don't know, I'm pretty sure you do this in other modern MMOs. Because I think a lot of abilities can be cast while moving, even in like more kind of traditional combat style MMOs. But most players in Guild Wars 2, like even honestly, particularly in PvP and World versus World, genuinely struggle with this. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone watching this video and anyone who's new to the game, practice moving and attacking at the same time. Guild Wars 2 is an incredibly movement-based game. If you aren't able to do that, you will get demolished in every game mode, even PvE, by the way. Like you'll when you get to the expansion style content, if you don't have the ability to attack enemies and like throw out abilities while moving, you'll actually have a really hard time in playing the game. So that's a really important skill that I think a lot of people kind of miss out on.
Yeah, I think probably one of the only things is if they're coming from Final Fantasy XIV, or if they play this game like in tandem with Final Fantasy XIV, is especially if you're playing something like a Black Mage, which is a full caster, you do have to stand still and in essentially like a ground buff your ley lines. And then because of the ping, it's not really an issue that they have, but I'm going to call it the ping issue. You would have to learn how to slide cast. So you'd be casting and your ability would be about to go off in like 0.2 seconds, and you would move at like the exact same time as your ability was about to go off, so that the cast bar still went, your ability still hits the target, and you're able to move out of the way. And a lot of people actually refer to that as kind of like a skill. So I think that's where part of it comes from, is a lot of people don't really realize that they can move, especially with projectiles too. And that would have been a good one to cover as well, because when I started playing the game, I realized this, but I didn't realize what would actually block projectiles so easy or like ruin my line of sight of a target. So even like a little knoll, like you're going by like a grassy knoll and it's just like this little area, and I'm like, oh, so apparently this little thing that looks like it's about a foot high is blocking me from hitting something with projectiles. That's cool. So I think that's one of my biggest ones too. But
yeah. Someone in the chat just reminded me of something that's really important. One thing, we kind of alluded to this earlier actually, but it's really worth hitting this like over the head with a giant hammer. People think that offensive support is more important than defensive support in this game. For example, everyone's like, oh yeah, bro, yeah, I love my might, I love my quickness, oh yeah, it's so good. But no one's ever like, wow, guys, protection, insanely overpowered boon. Perma regen, actually disgusting, right? Wow, insanely overpowered. No one ever says that, and this is actually one of the biggest reasons. Like, if you took a pug raid, or even a pug fractal group actually, and you increase the protection uptime to 100%, you increase the regen uptime to 100%, you increase the swiftness uptime. By the way, that one is one that really drops a lot these days, actually. Swiftness in raids to 100%, you dramatically increase the win rate. And this is something that a lot of players really don't get. Everyone's like, oh yeah, bro, I want, yeah, I want my 3% extra DPS. Oh yeah, dude, let's go. Right? The problem with this is that they then feed instantly, go down state, and die, right? And their 3% extra DPS was completely pointless. And like, it turns out that losing defensive support is absolutely horrible in any kind of content. It's true in PvP and World versus World, but people tend to kind of respect the boons a little bit more there. But in PvE, players really mess this up. In general, people really underestimate boons, just flat. They do not understand how good these effects really are. You're not talking like, 3% extra damage. No, you're talking 30% extra damage. You're talking 30% damage reduction. Do you guys know how broken regen is, guys? Like, let me just rant about regen real quick, okay? You could apply 10 target regen as a druid, as a tempest. it will unironically heal everyone in your raid for like 600 every second. So you can press not even a single other button. You just like, no hands, right? And you'll heal for 6k a second if you have regen on everyone. That is, I'm sorry, what? Right? Bear in mind, by the way, guys, that people have like 15k HP in this game in PvE, right? Are you kidding me? Like, so you heal people to like full every like 20 seconds, right? It's like disgusting, right? Like how unbelievably good that is. And protection makes regen even better because you take less damage, but you heal the same amount. It's like, are you kidding me? This is the most broken boon ever made, right? And players not respecting how good defensive support is probably the biggest leading cause of death in raids and fractals, funnily enough.
So we're not going to talk about how amazing quickness is and making sure that our warrior takes the power banner?
I mean, those things are actually really good and they're really important. But you know what? Something really funny, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, I know you're joking there, but I know you're messing around, but it's not actually even as good as people think. So I've been doing a few speedrun challenges of raids recently, and we played without Druid, right? And this is considered to be like a whoa, you're playing without Druid?
Without Druid and Scourge, I feel like it's the big
thing. Are you crazy? Well, no Druid? How can you do DPS? It's not possible. And we're also playing with a very defensive support set there with a Tempest Healer, which I consider to be an absolute S-tier profession, by the way, just so everyone's aware. One of the best support builds in the game easily is support Tempest. And we're playing Boon Chrono, like Tank Chrono, which again is one of the best support builds in the game. And these are builds that no one plays because everyone goes, oh, it doesn't do DPS, Teapot. Support Chrono doesn't do very much damage. Well, no, it doesn't do that much damage, you're right. But it carries your ass really hard. And oh, there's no Frost Spirit, no Spotter on Tempest Teapot is bad, don't play it. Right? No, it doesn't, no one cares, right? And do you know how quickly we were able to clear the raids with this composition? Yeah, that's right. 2 hours and 17 minutes for all 7 raid wings. Okay, and fun fact, guys, the world record for a clear right now is 2 hours and 5 minutes. In other words, with 2 healers, a lower DPS comp, and 6 necros as like the ultra carry build, compared to a full tryhard setup with people who actually know what they're doing, we were 12 minutes slower in a full clear. So in other words, all of that like, oh wow, Tempest is so bad, Teapot. We lost 12 minutes, right? In every raid in the game. That's unreal. Okay, we lost less than 2 minutes per raid wing, right? Wow, how horrible, right? And that was, again, running an incredibly safe comp with double Chrono instead of Firebrands and Renegades, Necromancers instead of more aggressive DPS options, Tempest instead of Druid, right? And a second healer, right? Like, the groups that go for the speedrun stuff, they run one healer, right? They go for the one healer setup for more damage, which is quite right, by the way. That's correct, right? Obviously, right? If you're going to do a speedrun, you go max damage, right? Mm-hmm. But we didn't do that because my entire point was I got really fed up people saying, I cannot play raids. Raids are not good. Tempest is not viable. Well, you know what, bitch? Beat my time, right? And then you can talk about what's viable, right? I'll kick your ass with 3 healers. I will crush any group that says that Tempest isn't bad, right? I'll annihilate them, right? With my composition by like an hour, right? Okay, that's the difference here as well. Like, I'm slower than the world record by 12 minutes. The groups that say this stuff, I'll beat them by an hour, by 2 hours, right? And that's kind of like the really big misconception that I see not only in the community, but certainly in the veteran player base as well. We talked about this earlier, right? Like, what's good and what is not, and why. Why is a build good? Why is that bad? Why does that work? Why does that not work? This is what most players simply do not grasp, right? And that's why I've been doing these videos. I've been trying to provide data and metrics on why this is why this is so good and like why these builds actually are good, and why it very much depends on like your execution, like how your ability to not feed, right, and all that sort of stuff that really kicks in with this stuff. And that's the broader thing. The broader concept is that people don't really understand the concept of the metagame and what it is, why it is, and how it is, right? But that's probably for another time. Okay, you'll set me off for another few hours, and not only will I not sleep, okay, like you won't either.
I mean, we're almost at that point anyway, because I mean, I have to be up for work in a little bit. But I mean, no, I really do appreciate it. And it's funny because I love how people in chat are like, I love Teapot's troll voice and all of this. And I'm sitting here going, I've hung out in your chat. Like, that's literally some of the things that people, like, I swear people just try to fire you up, honestly.
Oh yeah.
Just because they want
They know
to
it.
hear what you yeah.
Yeah, they want me to just start smashing, you know? That's what they love. They love to see it, right? That's what they're there for. Now, there are definitely some people that do that, but I always try and respond. I don't assume people are in bad faith, you know? Like, even though they probably are, sometimes people are kind of trolling me or whatever. I know that not everyone is, and I think it's a really... I know I was kind of joking in a way, like kind of like making fun of people to an extent there, but I genuinely view it from a point of compassion. When I see people say Ellie is bad, what I see is someone who wants to play Ellie but feels like they can't. If that makes any sense, right? Like that's what I see, and that to me is really sad. Actually, you know, that upsets me because that means this player is feeling frustrated, right? They're feeling, you know, like they're being locked out of the game and they can't play the build they want. They can't play the playstyle they want. You know, if that's playing Necro or playing like a tank Mesmer or, you know, playing, you know, a DPS Thief or whatever people are shitting on in the current meta, right? It's something that I don't like. And yeah, I will be, you know, a little bit bombastic. You know, I'll kind of like, you know, do some like meme stuff, right, to kind of answer it. But I always try and, you know, really explain it to people in a way that, you know, sets people at ease and kind of clarifies things and says, yeah, you can play Ellie. You can play Ellie. It's really good, actually. You know, you can play Tank Chrono. It's actually really good. Yeah, you can play Scourge. It's really strong. Reaper is great. Scrapper is awesome, right? Herald is great. Like, Herald, dude, that's a good build. Like, Power Herald, actually really good build, by the way. If anyone likes Herald, you should definitely play. It's really strong. And there are all these things that people think are really bad, but are actually pretty good. You know, surprisingly good, a lot better than people think they are. And that's the kind of thing that really makes me sad because, you know, ArenaNet have developed all these really cool strategies and compositions and builds that you can do, and people don't play them because they don't give you like a 3% damage modifier in a game where you can clear the content with 4 people instead of 10. Right? And if you do it with 10 people, you won't even get through half of the enrage timer. And you can clear it like... There are some bosses you can clear without even having weapons equipped, okay? Like that... That's what you're dealing with here. Right? Imagine being upset over like a 3% damage modifier, right? When you can kill bosses without having any weapons. Or only auto-attacking. Oh, bonus meme actually there. I know I'm saying that it's like, oh, okay, you can play bad builds because it doesn't matter. That's not even the half of it. The builds aren't even bad. Like, you know, if you play a lot of these builds really well, you'll perform extremely well on them, like better than most people playing meta builds, or, you know, not meta builds, but the builds that people consider to be good. Because meta, by the way, guys, does not mean best in slot. This is a stupid backronym. Meta does not mean most effective tactic available, guys. Meta actually refers to the meta game. That is to say, the externality of the game when considered within the context of a slice in time developed by the players. It essentially means what builds are being played. It does not actually necessarily refer to the strength of the builds. For example, in PvP, Trapper Soul Beast is actually a pretty bad build. It's not very good. Against good players, it is awful. However, it is a meta build because people play it a lot. And a really good counterexample of this was actually during a PvP tournament called Masteries of the Arena. Grenade Holosmith was not a meta build, but a player called Zan started playing it in the tournament, and it turned out it was completely broken. It then became a meta build. By definition, any build that becomes good was not a meta build, right? It then becomes a meta build, right? This is the constant evolution. This is what it means to have a meta game. It is constantly evolving. It is not referring to effectiveness directly. It is referring to if people play it or not. That's if it's meta or not. For example, Tempest, in Guild Wars 2 raids, you could argue it's actually a bit of an off-meta build because people don't play it very often. Does that mean it's weak? No, absolutely not. It turns out that Tempest is actually insanely overpowered. Same with Heal Necro. Heal Necro is definitely an off-meta build. Not a crazy amount of people play that build. Some people do, but not that many people. It's certainly towards the off-meta area of Guild Wars 2 Theorycraft, but it is actually the most overpowered build in the entire game. Not even close, actually. But yeah, there you go. That's the meta rant. Okay, coming soon, probably on my channel every day. You know, subscribe.
I feel like at the end of this we should have some kind of quiz. Like I should have a link to a Google Doc or something that's a quiz of everything that we've talked about. Like like my husband saying there will be a test on this chat.
Yeah, there will be. Okay, I'm gonna be in the comment section quizzing you. Okay, if I see anyone, get anything wrong, I'm just gonna say, ooh, that's a bad mark. Okay, you failed the test.
And actually, just since we're talking about it, and this, once I actually put this on YouTube, will be geared more toward new players, and we're discussing builds and meta and things like that. I know a lot of things when I first started playing was being told, check out like Snowcrow's meta battle, and now you're doing stuff for builds and pug builds and raid guides on Hard Stuck. So if we want to go over all three of these and include your own, make sure that you really, boost that a little bit.
You mean so like Snowcrows? Yeah, I mean like Snowcrows are really good. Like their site is amazing. Like their resource is really, really good. It's just that people don't read it. Like Snowcrows actually very clearly say how to play each build, why it's good, where it's good, all that kind of stuff. But people just don't read the text. It's actually not SC's fault particularly. It's really good for raid builds and like optimized builds. Hardsuck is my site. It's obviously amazing. It's very good. Okay, very high energy. It's got the one thing that we have there that I really like is that we have kind of like a more flexible version of the build. Usually has a bit more defensive ability, like more health, like more damage mitigation, more defensive ability choice, defensive stat choice, that kind of stuff, which is kind of great for starting out and for, again, having a little bit more flexibility, translating into different game modes and just learning encounters, learning how to play. And maybe like it has like multiple builds that you can play with the same gear set, that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of that. It also has the optimized builds there too. But again, like the way things are worded there, it's less terms of like absolute rotation, more like these are your good moves. This is how you should use them. Yeah, it's good. You should go and look at them. Some of the builds are not quite finished yet, but most of them are, and they're very good. Get in there right now. Hardsuck.gg, very nice. Come and spam us in discord.gg/hardsuck as well. Bother me, okay? I love being bothered, okay? Don't worry, I don't bite.
He really does love being bothered. I mean, it's what, 6 a.m. for you right now?
It is 5 a.m.
5
I'm fresh.
a.m.
I'm good.
Yeah.
See, I told you guys, by the way. See, my voice is fine now. Like, it's fine. It's all good. Yeah, I had to warm it up a little bit at the start, okay?
And since we're obviously doing this live, and this is probably only my third podcast that I've done live, and we do actually have quite an active chat that's been listening to us. Thank you guys very much. I did see a couple of questions that people had in chat that I tried to integrate into the podcast, but was there anything else that people just wanted to go over that you wanted to possibly ask Teapot? Not even for new players, just something that you didn't fully understand, or like a theory that you've had that you wanted to go over, because we would probably have a little bit of time for that before we close up and, sell out and talk about where you can find us.
I like that. That's good.
Keep what, closing out up and selling out. What is LN?
Lucky Noobs. It's a not exactly an equivalent of Snowcrows, but they are they're the same type of thing. Like Lucky Noobs is a German speedrunning guild that has a similar website to Snowcrows for optimized high level builds for raids in particular. So yeah, that's basically it. Like a counterpart, right? Of if you don't like the name Snowcrows, well, you could try Lucky Noobs as well. It's kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit of a different name. The website looks different too. It's got a different color scheme. Maybe you prefer it. There you go. Boom. That's how it works.
Perfect. Why did they choose to name the new Ranger spec Untamed instead of the Superior Bonk Beast?
I mean, because sadly, ANET is no fun. They have to go with no meme names allowed. I thought they were going to call it Warden as well, like Beast Warden or something like that. But they didn't do that. In fact, they changed it because they're like, oh, we know they guessed it. We have to change it now. So they probably changed it. Boom, exposed.
Oh, that's a good one. Guild Wars 2 efficiency.
Oh, yeah. This is a super useful tool. Basically, it allows you to track all the metrics on it. It's a third-party website, and you can put your API key in. So Guild Wars 2 is a very extensive API. It allows basically applications or even you to view a huge amount of data about your account directly from it basically squeezes out of the Guild Wars 2 database and publicly views it to you, so you can really break it down. And Guild Wars 2 Efficiency is a website that takes your API key and kind of neatly formats everything about your account, like what skins you've got unlocked, how many raids you've done, achievements that you've done, what's in your storage, what's in your guild storage, right? You know, like what's your rating in PvP, how many minis have you got, how many gems have you spent on the game, right? You know, like all that kind of crazy stuff. Like there's a huge amount of useful data there as well in Guild Wars 2 Official for kind of tracking your progress. Think of it as like a really, really good way to measure your progress through the game.
Yeah, that's a good one. And possibly, I would say maybe even talking about arc DPS, and I forget what the mount add-on is. Is it radial?
Yeah, Mount Radial. So there are, in general, any kind of third-party modification to the Guild Wars 2 interface is forbidden. You're not allowed to do that. ANET don't like it. They'll ban you if they catch you doing it. There are a few exceptions, though, to this, and Arc DPS and a few graphics modifiers are exempt. Arc DPS is a damage per second meter. In other words, it will tell you how much damage you're doing, how much damage everyone in your group is doing, and some other stuff too, like what's the boon uptime, like what mechanics, who got hit by mechanics, and it can actually make little nice logs that will show you like a timeline of a raid encounter and like what happened, right? All the phases, right? When that happened, right? Who got hit by stuff, right? You know, who was doing damage, who got the biggest burst, right? The DPS curves, right? All that kind of stuff. So RDPS, really good analytics tool for raids and fractals and any kind of PvE, actually. Mount Radial is essentially a tool that basically just makes it easier to choose what mount you want. It will like have a little, instead of having to like click on a little drop down menu to select your, or drop up menu rather, to select your mount, it will create a different interface that will just look a little bit prettier. It's a bit easier to use. It's one of the very few things that you're allowed to use to modify the game directly. And the other exceptions to like little add-ons you can do are typically related to graphics. For example, there's a way to make the game run on DirectX 12 for more performance. That's legal. And there's also a few graphics mods like Guild Wars 2 Hook or Reshade, which basically makes the game look all pretty. So if you like having your eyes melted even more, you can do that.
And actually, another good one is Action Cam. I know a lot of people tell others to use Action Cam, but essentially what type of cam it is and how you would play using that.
So Action Cam is exactly what it says on the tin. It because Guild Wars 2 is kind of an interesting combat system. It's not like your WoW or Final Fantasy, so it's not like a strict tab target. You know, here's a target, me fire fireball at the target, fireball goes to the target. Guild Wars 2 is a hybrid game. So in other words, if you like throw out a fireball, right, it actually, throws out, right, and it will hit anything in its path, right? It's an action tab target hybrid game. Enabling Action Cam essentially says, you know what, that tab target stuff, that's for suckers. We're going to go full action. And because of the combat system, it actually works, right? You can do this. And basically it means that you don't have the mouse cursor anymore. You just have a reticule. And when you move the mouse, right, it just turns your character and turns the camera, essentially turning it into a full action game that you might have, say, on a console. Final Fantasy has this as well, of course, right? Something like Black Desert, something like that, or any kind of like spectacle fighter, right, that you might have on a console or on PC as well. That's basically what it does. It turns it into a full action combat system game. Now, I don't want to be a little bit of a party pooper here. It does actually give you less fine control over your gameplay. So it does essentially limit you a little bit. In other words, it is inferior. All things equal, if you have two players of equal skill, the player not using Action Cam will outperform the player using Action Cam. This is particularly true on certain builds that have a lot of kind of ground targeted abilities. It's much harder to aim ground targeted abilities with Action Cam. Like, if you're, say, on Grenade Engineer, right, you're trying to throw grenades at people, it's really annoying to do this because you have much less control over your camera than if you were using the normal kind of mouse and keyboard setup there as a non-action camera. But it is a perfectly okay way to play the game. And if you're not really super worried about like every single itty bitty optimization, then try it. If you're not really a big fan of the normal combat system and you want to do something else and you're like kind of bored of the way it plays out and you want to have like a more action oriented experience, then do it. Go for it. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, you can clear all content in the game with it. You can play PvP and World vs. World with Action Cam, but do be aware that it is a bit of a limiter on your potential as a player.
And I feel like another one, or just something that I've been asked a lot recently, especially by new players that are playing the base game and they haven't purchased anything, is DX11, how the beta is available essentially to everyone, that you have to click the box to opt in. And yeah, that's pretty much it. the changes that it has and the noticeable bugs that people have had so far.
DX11 is super cool. Basically, you might say, "What? Why would you use DX11 if you've got DX12?" Well, it turns out there's a really big difference between like running something in like the actual native application and running like a third-party software that kind of like says, "Oh, we're going to pretend to be DX12." It's obviously better to have it native, right? It's more consistent, easier to maintain, right? And easier to push more advances on in the future, of course. And DX11 is basically an engine upgrade to running Guild Wars 2 on DirectX 11 instead of DirectX 9, which is a very, very old version of the graphics, of graphics API, right? API being basically something that lets computer programmers draw things on your screen using your graphics card. Basically, DX9 has a lot of issues with it, particularly with regards to utilizing modern hardware very effectively. And DirectX 11 is a big step up in this regard. And you can try it right now. You might go like, well, why is it even an option? Why don't they just make everyone use it? Well, it's because obviously they're giving us this feature before they've completely polished it and fully tested it. So there are a few issues. Your game might crash more than usual, or it might just crash, because you shouldn't really expect crashes. But your game will crash a bit, maybe at annoying times. So in general, don't have it enabled if you're doing something that's really important, right? For example, if you're doing like progression raiding with your guild, probably not a good idea to run DirectX 11. If you're playing world versus world and there's a queue on the map, probably not a good idea, because if you get kicked out, you're going to be in the queue and unable to get back in. However, just for generally playing the game, it will actually increase your performance a lot. It is actually a really big upgrade. The developers did an incredibly good job, actually, of upgrading this engine. It's really, really good. Your performance will significantly go up, particularly if you have more modern hardware. The game is a lot less stuttery, you get more frames per second, and you don't drop frames as well. So your frame rate doesn't just go higher, it doesn't go low. I know that sounds like a bit of a, well, obviously, right? But that's actually what makes games look bad. Kind of a general point here. Having a consistently low FPS doesn't actually feel bad. What feels bad is when your frame rate suddenly like stutters, right? Up, down, up, down, up, down. That's what sucks. And this is what DirectX 11 in particular does a really good job of handling. It irons out your frame rate. So yeah, is Guild Wars 2 going to be running at 300 FPS, 4K, RTX on? No, it's not. The game is probably still going to have some frame rate issues because it is a pretty intense game when it comes to character models and effects and stuff like that. It's pretty wild, right? But will it make the game run a hell of a lot better, a lot more consistent, and look way better and feel way better? Hell yeah. Yeah, it will. That's DX11.
Perfect. So I think probably now we could plug everything. So if you want to tell everyone where they can find you, something that you are working on currently, and I forgot to do that at the beginning. I'm sorry.
Hey, it's all good. That's what we like to see. Okay, get the shilling in at the end. Well, I mean, you guys have heard me speak a lot. You know what I'm about at this point. You guys get the gist, but it's me. I'm Teapot. I'm the Guild Wars 2 guy, right? You'll catch me nearly every day at twitch.tv/MightyTeapot, youtube.com/MightyTeapot, twitter.com, speaking in all caps, hell yeah, /MightyTeapot, @MightyTeapot, whatever you want to do. I'm there. Go follow me. Go and watch, okay? Leave a comment on this video, okay? Let's go. Get some likes on this video. Let's get some subs on this video. Let's go. Okay, but anyway, I like Guild Wars 2. I talk about Guild Wars 2. I know quite a lot about the game. I play all the game modes. I also am doing some community stuff, right? I'm trying to make Guild Wars 2, relevant, walking that road to relevancy. So if you want to get involved in that kind of stuff there as well, I'm running a community called Hardstuck, which is, well, a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, as I'm sure you can tell, aimed at assisting new players, building competitive events, and creating a more social gameplay experience for every game mode. You can join our Discord at discord.gg/hardstuck to get involved in that. Ask us questions. We've got channels for everything, loads of roles, loads of events to sign up and participate in, like meta trains, PvP stuff, strikes, raids, world vs. world, whatever you want. We got it. Get in there right now. And if you're not really into Discord, that's okay too. We've got hardstuck.gg. You can see our calendar of things that are going to happen. You can see all of our builds, all of our guides that will be coming up there as well. YouTube channel, soon TM. There's all some really cool stuff, actually. I'm really happy to actually announce that We're going to be doing a lot of introductory guides for PvP, even stuff like commanding in World War II, how to command a raid squad, how to command this, how to command that. Will all be going up actually on that channel, including some really fun stuff very soon actually on how to actually play rotationally, right? So it will walk you through, say, a rotation for a DPS build in Guild Wars 2, starting from auto attacks and building all the way up to the full rotation at the end. We really hope to provide some really useful resources for new players, returning players, veteran players, whatever. Just having more fun, competing, playing with the group, and clearing everything and destroying Guild Wars 2 in a good way, not a bad way. That's it. That's all I got. I think I got everything. Nice.
Perfect. And yeah, so I feel like you're the Guild Wars 2 guy, and I'm the person that everybody knows is the one that asks all of the questions, honestly, now, the podcast person. But yeah, so guys, my stream's been kind of hectic recently. New job to take care of a new house, and some people in chat might not know, but new baby that we're going to be having, which is why. So streaming in the evenings instead of during the day, and weekends when we're able. This weekend we're moving into the new house, so there's that. But yeah, twitch.tv/Xandrii, youtube.com/Xandrii or Xandblast Productions. I mainly do podcasts and playthroughs, and I've been doing my first impressions of things coming from other games, and eventually do want to also raid lead and put my own PvP groups together. Also have our own guild, but my main love for content creation, recently at least, has been these podcasts, and my husband created this new overlay, which has the new Coffee and Games logo that I'm really excited about too. So, and this will not only be on YouTube, but it will also be on Anchor and Spotify. So if you guys check this out here, so that has all of the links for everything. So it'll be on Anchor, Spotify, and then if you want to see our lovely faces and how much Teapot gets really enthusiastic when he explains things, this will be on YouTube as well. So not sure about when it'll be uploaded, but it will probably be tomorrow, as well as the podcast with Silver, which I'm really excited about. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I appreciate it. We also have a Discord too, and I'm also a part of Hardstuck, so I try to talk about Hardstuck as much as I can when I can, but since Teapot already did, oh, it's HF. There we go. We can get that going, and I'll try not to forget to raid this time. I was doing the podcast with Silver earlier, and I forgot to raid, so I tried to send it to Iron Maiden, but it's Iron's birthday.
Whoa.
So I'm going to send you guys over to Iron Maiden. Don't forget to say hi. Give a follow if for some reason you're not already following. Check out Iron's guides on YouTube, some pretty awesome jumping puzzle guides, and again, thank you so much, Teapot, for doing this. I appreciate it, especially so early/late.
No problem. I'm up all night anyway. But yeah, it's all good. You know, it was funny actually. This is weird. I was about to say, oh, you should host Xandrii. But wait, you are Xandrii. That's not possible.
I know. It's weird because we're doing something different.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, definitely, guys, everyone's watching here. Make sure you follow Xandrii, subscribe everywhere. She's awesome. Definitely check out that stuff there as well. That new logo there, you know, when I saw it, I was like, whoa, that's pretty good. Okay. The coffee machine is CG. It's actually amazing, right? I love to see it. It's a fire logo. It's amazing. We've got a raid coming through. Definitely check out that next stream. I love to see it. But thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. You know, as you can probably tell, I love talking about the game. Okay, you give me an excuse to do it. Okay, that's a mistake. Honestly, it could go on for a long time. You know, you got to be you got to be careful on that one. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Xandrii. And everyone, make sure to follow, subscribe everywhere, all the social media, all the links. Click them all. Okay, just mash them all, like spamming them, right? And then link to all your friends and make your friends do it too, guys. Oh yeah, you got to get them in on this. There's no escape. But yeah, thanks, guys. See you later.
See ya.